Everyone laughed when my stepmother slapped me off my chair, sending red wine cascading down my hair like a humiliating punchline. The sound of their amusement filled the room, sharp and cruel. Yet, one man at the end of the table remained stone-faced. I had no idea that the silent stranger watching my disgrace would one day hand me the weapon to destroy this entire family empire. My name is Tegan Cooper. The wind whipping around the Hennepin County Government Center was biting, a typical Minneapolis freeze that settled deep in the marrow of your bones, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. It was the temperature of anticipation. It was the cold, hard reality of justice finally coming home to roost. I adjusted the lapels of my trench coat, took a breath that tasted of exhaust fumes and impending snow, and stepped out of the black sedan. Immediately, the world exploded into a chaotic symphony of shutter clicks and shouted questions. The media presence was suffocating. They were packed onto the courthouse steps like sardines, a sea of microphones and cameras hungry for the final act of a tragedy they had been consuming in bite-sized pieces for months. I kept my chin high, my eyes fixed on the revolving doors ahead. I did not look at the lenses. I did not acknowledge the questions being hurled at me like stones. Ms. Cooper, is it true you rejected the settlement? Tegan, look this way. Do you think your father will go to prison? I let the noise wash over me, impenetrable. My heels struck the pavement with a rhythmic, deliberate cadence. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a clock counting down, a metronome keeping time for a song that was about to reach its crescendo. Every step was a statement. I was not the stumbling, weeping girl who had fled a dinner party in disgrace years ago. I was the architect of this moment. Inside the courthouse, the air was heavy, recycled, and smelled faintly of floor wax and anxiety. The noise of the press was muffled by the heavy glass doors, replaced by the cavernous echoes of the lobby. I moved through security with mechanical efficiency, my legal team flanking me like a tight legal team. To my right walked Alicia Romero. She was a force of nature wrapped in a charcoal suit, a former federal prosecutor whose reputation for shredding was legendary. She did not speak to me. She did not have to. Her presence alone was a signal to everyone in the building that we were not here to negotiate. We were here to conquer. We navigated the corridors, heading toward the main courtroom. The hallway was lined with spectators who had not managed to get a seat inside, people drawn to the spectacle of a high-profile family immolation. I heard the whispers as I passed. They rippled through the crowd, hushed but audible in the tense atmosphere. That is her. That is the daughter. The Cooper case. Can you believe what they did? I heard the audio leaked online. Everyone laughed as her stepmother beat her. That phrase, it had become the headline, the hashtag, the caption on 1,000 TikTok videos analyzing the downfall of my family. Everyone laughed when my stepmother hit me. It was crude, sensationalist, and stripped of all nuance. Yet it cut to the core of the truth. It was the hook that had captured the public imagination, transforming a complex case of corporate fraud and inheritance theft into a primal story of Cinderella biting back. The bailiff opened the double doors to the courtroom, and silence descended like a guillotine blade. The room was packed. Every bench was filled. Sketch artists were already poised with their pencils, ready to capture the misery of the wealthy. I walked down the center aisle, the sound of my shoes hitting the wood floor echoing in the unnatural quiet. It felt as if the air itself had solidified, pressing against my skin. I did not look at the gallery. I focused only on the table to the left. The defense table. They were sitting in a row, a portrait of a dynasty in decay. Closest to the aisle was my father, Richard Cooper. He looked smaller than I remembered. The titan of Minneapolis real estate, the man who had built skyline-defining towers and crushed unions with a wave of his hand, now looked shrunken in his expensive suit. His skin was sallow, his posture rigid. He stared straight ahead, refusing to turn his head as I passed, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. It was the only sign that he was aware of my presence. Next to him sat Vanessa Cooper, my stepmother, the woman who had spent decades curating an image of effortless elegance and maternal warmth. Today, that mask was cracking. Her blonde hair was coiffed to perfection. Her pearls were luminous, but her eyes were darting around the room with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. She was gripping her designer handbag so tightly that her knuckles were white. She did not look like the queen of the social circuit anymore. She looked like a defendant. And then there was Logan, my half-brother, the golden boy. He sat on the far side, slumped in his chair, looking less like an executive and more like a child who had been called to the principal's office. He was sweating, even from here. I could see the sheen on his forehead. He kept whispering something to his lawyer, his hands shaking as he poured water from a glass pitcher. I reached the plaintiff's table and took my seat. Alicia sat beside me, arranging her files with calm precision. She leaned in, her voice low and steady. "Ready, Tegan?" she asked. I looked at her. Am I? I asked myself. The last time I had been in a room with all three of them, I had been on my knees, humiliated, covered in wine, while they jeered. The memory threatened to rise up, a bile-soaked tide of shame, but I pushed it down. That was the past. That was a different Tegan. "I am ready," I whispered back. I turned my gaze to the gallery behind the defense table. I needed to see him. I needed to know he was there. My eyes scanned the rows of spectators, past the reporters typing furiously on their laptops, past the curious onlookers, until I found him. He was sitting in the back row, tucked away in the corner, almost blending into the wood paneling. Samuel Hart. He was older now. His hair was completely white, and the lines on his face were deeper, like carved ravines. He wore a simple, dated brown suit that made him look like a retired schoolteacher rather than the key to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. He was watching me. His expression was unreadable, just as it had been all those years ago. He was not smiling. He never smiled. Our eyes locked for a brief second. In the chaos of that night years ago, he had been a silent observer, a statue in the corner while my world fell apart. I had hated him then for his silence. I had thought he was just another one of Richard's paid lackeys, indifferent to the cruelty being displayed. I had been so wrong. Samuel gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a confirmation. The pieces were in place. The trap was sprung. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed, snapping my attention back to the front of the room. Judge Lawrence Sterling entered, his black robes billowing. He was a stern man, known for his intolerance of courtroom theatrics, which made him the perfect arbiter for the circus the Cooper family had brought to town. He took his seat, the wood of the gavel striking the sound block with a noise that resonated like a gunshot. "Be seated," Judge Sterling commanded. The room collectively exhaled as we sat. The tension was palpable, a physical weight pressing down on everyone. This was not just a civil trial for damages. This was the prelude to criminal indictments. The outcome of today would determine whether the Cooper family walked away with their empire bruised but intact, or whether they would leave in handcuffs. Judge Sterling adjusted his glasses and looked down at the paperwork before him. He took his time, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. Finally, he looked up, his gaze sweeping over the defense table before landing on Alicia. "Ms. Romero," he said, his voice gravelly and authoritative, "we are here to address the admissibility of Exhibit A, as well as the corroborating testimony regarding the events of November 14th, 7 years ago. The defense has moved to suppress this evidence on grounds of privacy and illegal surveillance." One of the defense lawyers, a high-priced shark named Corbin who charged $1,000 an hour, stood up. He smoothed his silk tie, projecting an air of indignant outrage. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity, "this so-called evidence is nothing more than a fruit of the poisonous tree. It is a clandestine recording made without the consent of my clients, in the privacy of their own home, intended solely to embarrass and humiliate them. It has no probative value regarding the financial mismanagement claims. It is prejudicial theater, plain and simple." Alicia did not even stand up immediately. She waited for Corbin to finish, letting his words hang in the air until they started to sound thin. Then, She rose. She did not use big gestures. She did not shout. She simply spoke the truth. "Your Honor," Alicia said, her voice cutting through the room. The recording in question was not made illegally. It was recorded on the internal security system installed by the defendants themselves. Furthermore, it does not just show a family dispute. It captures, in real time, the admission of a conspiracy to defraud the primary shareholder of Cooper Holdings. It captures the coercion of a legal witness. And perhaps most importantly, it establishes the motive for the systemic destruction of my client's professional reputation. Alicia paused, turning slightly to look at the jury box. Even though the jury was not yet seated for this specific motion, she was playing to the room. To understand the fraud, you must understand the intent. She continued, "You cannot separate the financial crime from the personal animus. They are inextricably linked. The defense wants you to believe this is just a business dispute. Exhibit A proves it is an attempted erasure of a human being." Judge Sterling looked between the two lawyers. He interlaced his fingers and rested his chin on them. The silence returned, thicker than before. I could hear the scratching of pens on paper from the reporter's gallery. I could hear the shallow breathing of Vanessa Cooper a few feet away. I looked at the defense table again. Richard was staring at the judge, his face a mask of stone, but I saw his hand trembling. He knew what was on that tape. He had spent years convincing himself that he was the hero of his own story, that sacrificing me was necessary for the greater good of the company. Today, that delusion was going to die. "Motion to suppress is denied," Judge Sterling ruled. A gasp went through the courtroom. Corbin slumped back in his seat, defeated. Vanessa let out a small, strangled sound. "The court will view the footage to establish context for the witness testimony to follow." The judge continued, "Bailiff, please play Exhibit A." The lights in the courtroom did not dim, but it felt like the world grew darker. A large screen descended from the ceiling to the left of the judge's bench. Monitors in front of the jury box and the counsel tables flickered to life. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I had watched this footage a dozen times in preparation for this day. I knew every frame. I knew exactly when the wine would fly. I knew exactly when the slap would connect. I knew exactly when the laughter would start. But living it was one thing. Watching it displayed for the world to see was another. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Alicia. She did not look at me, but her grip was firm, grounding me. "Don't look down," she whispered. "Watch them. Watch them see themselves." I took a deep breath. She was right. I was not the victim anymore. I was the witness. I turned my head. I did not look at the screen. I looked at my father. I looked at Vanessa. I looked at Logan. The screen turned blue, then flickered into high-definition clarity. The timestamp in the corner read November 14th, 7 o'clock in the evening. The setting was the grand dining room of the Cooper estate, a room dripping with crystal chandeliers and mahogany, a room designed to impress. The audio crackled to life, the sound of silverware clinking on china, the murmur of polite conversation, the voice of my father, booming and confident, unaware that he was speaking into his own grave. I saw Vanessa flinch as the video started. She brought a hand up to cover her mouth. Logan looked down at the table, unable to watch. But Richard stared at the screen. He stared at his past self, the man who thought he was untouchable. On the screen, the younger version of me walked into the frame. I looked so young, so hopeful. I was wearing a dress I had bought specifically for this night, thinking I was finally going to be recognized for my work, thinking I was finally going to be accepted. I saw the figure of Samuel Hart in the video, sitting at the far end of the table, in the recording. Just as in real life, he was still, watchful, a ghost in the machine. The courtroom was dead silent. No one moved, no one breathed. The only sound was the ghostly echo of a dinner party from 7 years ago, playing out on the screens. And then, the voice from the speaker, my voice, spoke up, shaky but determined. "Father, about the capital injection, the $600,000 I transferred." I saw Richard in the courtroom close his eyes. The video played on. The tension in the recorded room spiked. The insults began. Vanessa's voice, sharp as a razor, cut through the air. "You really think you saved anything? Tegan, you are a receptionist with a grandiose title." I watched the faces of the jury. They were transfixed. They were seeing the facade of the polished Cooper family peel away, layer by ugly layer. Then came the moment. The movement on screen was sudden. The splash of red liquid, the gasp, and then the slap. It sounded like a thunderclap in the quiet courtroom. On the screen, I fell. I tumbled out of the chair, crashing onto the expensive Persian rug. And then, the sound that would haunt me for years, the sound that was now echoing off the walls of the Hennepin County Government Center, filling every ear in the room. Laughter. It started with Logan, a nervous chuckle that grew, then Vanessa, a cruel, mocking sound, then the other guests, sycophants desperate to please the king. They were laughing. They were pointing. Everyone laughed. Except for one man. On the screen, the camera angle shifted slightly, catching Samuel Hart. He was looking at the fallen girl on the floor. He was not laughing. He was staring with a cold, terrifying intensity, his eyes shifting from me to the hidden camera lens in the corner of the ceiling. In the courtroom, the real Samuel Hart sat motionless in the back row, a mirror image of the man on the screen. I looked at my family. Vanessa was weeping now, silent tears of humiliation. Logan was pale as a sheet. Richard was staring at his hands. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of judgment. The air in the room had changed. The doubt was gone. The questions about whether I was a bitter daughter or a greedy opportunist had evaporated. Judge Sterling cleared his throat. The sound was incredibly loud. "Let the record show," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "that the video has been viewed." He looked at me. For a brief second, his judicial mask slipped, and I saw something else in his eyes. Pity? No, respect. "Ms. Romero," the judge said, "call your first witness." Alicia stood up. She did not need to look at her notes. She knew exactly where we were going. We were going back to the beginning. We were going back to the moment before the fall. The plaintiff calls Tegan Cooper to the stand. Alicia said, "I stood up. My legs felt strong. I walked to the witness box, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. As I sat down, I looked out at the sea of faces. I looked at the reporters, who were no longer whispering. I looked at the family who had tried to break me. And finally, I looked at Samuel Hart. He gave me one single, slow nod. It was time to tell the story. Not the story the tabloids wrote, not the story my father told his investors. The real story. The story of how a dynasty dies. I leaned into the microphone. "My name is Tegan Cooper," I said, my voice steady and clear. "And to understand why I'm here today, you have to understand who the Coopers were before the cameras started rolling. You have to understand the lie we were all living." The courtroom faded away. The faces blurred. I let the memory pull me back. Back to the time before the slap. Back to the time when I still believed I could make them love me. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I was no longer in a courtroom in Minneapolis. I was standing in the lobby of Cooper Holdings, 5 years ago, looking at an architectural model of a city that was about to crumble. To understand the night the wine stained my dress, you have to understand the glass tower that cast a shadow over my entire life. The Cooper Group headquarters was a 40-story monolith of steel and tinted glass that pierced the skyline of Minneapolis. To the casual observer driving down I-35 West, it was a symbol of prosperity, a testament to urban development and architectural ambition. But to me, it was a fortress where I was the only soldier without a rank. Growing up, the business was the fourth member of our family. It sat at the dinner table, it dictated our vacations, and it consumed every ounce of oxygen in the room. My father, Richard Cooper, did not build homes. He built legacies, or at least, that was the slogan Vanessa had printed on the company brochures. Richard was a man carved from granite. He was not abusive in the traditional sense. He did not throw punches or break furniture. His cruelty was far more efficient. It was the cruelty of indifference. To Richard, people were assets or liabilities. You were either contributing to the bottom line, or you were dead weight, and from the moment I was born, a daughter in a world he believed belonged to men, I was categorized as an overhead cost. I remember bringing home straight A's in middle school, clutching the report card with sweaty hands, waiting for him to look up from his blueprints. He had glanced at the paper, then back at the architectural renderings for a new shopping complex in Edina. "Good," he had said, his voice flat. "Just make sure you do not get fat. Appearance is currency. Tegan." That was the extent of his fatherhood. Then there was Vanessa, my stepmother. If Richard was the iron fist, Vanessa was the velvet glove that strangled you so softly you did not realize you were dying until your lungs collapsed. She was a public relations genius, a woman who could spin a train wreck into a heartwarming story about community resilience. She had arrived in our lives 3 years after my mother died, bringing with her a son, Logan, and a terrifying obsession with optics. Vanessa did not hate me. Hate implies passion. Vanessa viewed me as a prop that did not quite fit the set design. She spent years trying to mold me into the perfect accessory for the Cooper family photos. She picked my clothes, dictated my hairstyles, and wrote my scripts for charity galas. "Smile less with your teeth, Tegan," she would whisper before the cameras clicked. "It makes you look desperate." We were the American dream, packaged and sold to the highest bidder. We were the Kennedys of the Midwest, minus the tragedy, or so we thought. But the rot was there, festering beneath the foundation. The dynamic became solidified when I was 16. I had asked to sit in on a board meeting, genuinely interested in how the company acquired land rights. Richard had laughed, a short, sharp sound. "This is not a place for little girls. Tegan," he had told me, "go help Vanessa with the seating charts for the gala. Logan, come here. I want you to see how we handle the zoning commission." Logan. My half-brother was 2 years younger than me, a boy who had never heard the word no in his entire life. He was charming in a superficial way, with Vanessa's bright smile and Richard's arrogance, but he lacked the one thing that made the Cooper empire function: competence. Logan treated the company like his personal playground. He skipped classes to play golf, barely graduated from a university where Richard had donated a library, and yet he was the heir apparent, the crown prince. I, on the other hand, went to war. I studied finance at Wharton, graduating in the top 5% of my class. I spent my nights analyzing market trends, understanding liquidity ratios, and studying the history of urban development. I did not do it for fun. I did it because I foolishly believed that meritocracy was real. I thought that if I came back to Minneapolis armed with undeniable skill, Richard would finally see me. I was wrong. When I returned to the Cooper Group, fresh out of business school with a resume that would have landed me a job on Wall Street, Richard gave me a desk in the back corner of the operations floor. My title was Junior Administrative Coordinator. It was a glorified secretary position. "You need to learn the ropes from the bottom," he had said. Meanwhile, Logan was named Vice President of Strategic Development on his first day. His office had a view of the river. Mine had a view of the break room microwave. For 2 years, I swallowed my pride. I fetched coffee for executives who had half my IQ. I proofread contracts that Logan had clearly not read himself. I watched as my brother made blunder after blunder, overbidding on land and wetlands, ignoring zoning laws that resulted in massive fines, and alienating long-term partners. Every time he failed, Vanessa was there to spin it. "It is just a learning curve," she would tell the press. "Logan is a visionary. He takes risks." But a company can only survive so many risks before the math stops working. The crisis hit in late October. It began as a whisper in the break room, then became a shout in the boardroom. The housing market in the Midwest was cooling rapidly, and the Cooper Group was over-leveraged. We had broken ground on the massive Lake Verity project, A luxury condo development that was Richard's dream and Logan's responsibility. Logan had miscalculated the material costs. He had signed contracts with suppliers without locking in the rates, and when inflation spiked, the budget exploded. To make matters worse, pre-sales were abysmal. No one was buying million-dollar condos in a recession. I saw the panic in the hallways. I saw the closed-door meetings where Richard's face turned a dangerous shade of red. I saw Vanessa pacing the corridor, on the phone with reporters, trying to kill stories about unpaid contractors. The company was bleeding. We were weeks away from insolvency. I knew this not because anyone told me, but because I was the one who actually read the financial statements that Logan left on the printer. I saw the cash flow statements. I saw the debt covenants we were about to breach. The ship was sinking, and the captain was too proud to admit he had hit an iceberg. It was a Tuesday night, 3 days before the infamous dinner, when I found the solution. I was alone in the office. The cleaning crew was vacuuming the hallway, the hum of the machine providing a drone to my thoughts. I had spread the blueprints and the ledgers out on my small, cramped desk. I had run the numbers 1,000 times. There was a way out. It required a complex restructuring of our debt, leveraging a forgotten asset, a hideous strip mall in St. Paul that we had owned for decades, and an immediate injection of liquid capital to pay off the most aggressive creditors. I did the math. We needed exactly $600,000 in immediate cash to bridge the gap until the restructuring loan was approved. $600,000. I stared at the number. It was a lot of money, but for a company like ours, it should have been pocket change. The problem was, we were illiquid. Richard's assets were tied up in the Verity land. Logan had spent the reserve fund on marketing, which I knew meant parties and trips to Cabo. I sat back in my cheap ergonomic chair and rubbed my temples. I knew where $600,000 was. It was in my bank account. When my grandmother, Eleanor Cooper, had passed away, she had been the only one who saw me. She had left me a trust fund, separate from Richard's control. She had told me, on her deathbed, to keep it for a rainy day, to keep it for my freedom. "This is your escape hatch, Tegan," she had whispered, her grip surprisingly strong. "Do not let them take it." I had invested it wisely. I had grown it. It was my safety net. It was the money I was going to use to finally leave this toxic family and start my own firm. But if I did not use it now, the Cooper Group would collapse. I looked around the empty office. I looked at the framed photos on the wall, pictures of buildings my grandfather had built, buildings my father had expanded. This company was not just Richard's ego, it was my heritage too. It was Eleanor's legacy. If it went under, thousands of people would lose their jobs. The reputation of the name Cooper would be destroyed. I could not let that happen. But I also knew the cost. I knew that if I walked into Richard's office and laid out this plan, if I offered my own money to save the ship, the narrative would change. They would take the money, they would take the plan, and then they would erase me from it. I could hear Vanessa's voice in my head already. Logan found a brilliant solution. The family pulled together. I sat there for a long time, the fluorescent lights humming above me. It was a crossroads. I could let them fail. I could watch Richard's arrogance finally cost him everything. I could watch Logan crash and burn. It would be poetic justice. But it would also be the end of everything I had worked for. I loved this company, even if it did not love me back. I loved the smell of the blueprints, the sound of the construction sites, the feeling of creating something from nothing. I made my decision. I printed the spreadsheet. I drafted the restructuring proposal. I wrote a check from my personal account for $600,000. I put it all in a plain manila folder. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Richard. He kept me waiting for 45 minutes. When I finally entered his office, Logan was there, looking pale and hungover, slumped on the leather sofa. Vanessa was standing by the window, looking out at the gray city. "What is it, Tegan?" Richard asked, not looking up from his computer. "I am busy trying to clean up a mess." "I know about the mess," I said, placing the folder on his desk, "and I know how to fix it." Richard looked at the folder, then at me. His expression was one of mild annoyance, as if a fly had landed on his lunch. "You know how to fix a multi-million-dollar liquidity crisis?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you find a coupon?" I ignored the insult. "Read it," I said. Richard opened the folder. He scanned the first page. Then he stopped. He flipped to the second page. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the check attached to the back. He went silent. Logan sat up. "What is it?" Richard ignored him. He read the proposal again. More slowly this time. I saw the gears turning in his head. He was a shark, and he recognized blood in the water, but he also recognized a life raft. This is viable," he muttered. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in years. "Where did you get this money?" "It is my inheritance from Grandma Eleanor," I said, "and the strategy is mine. It uses the St. Paul asset to secure a bridge loan." Vanessa walked over and looked over Richard's shoulder. Her eyes widened when she saw the check. $600,000, she whispered. "That covers the immediate vendor debt." "It saves the company," I said firmly. "It buys us 3 months, enough time to restructure." Silence filled the room. This was the moment. This was where they should have thanked me. This was where Richard should have stood up, shaken my hand, and acknowledged that his daughter had done what his son could not. Instead, Richard slowly closed the folder. He placed his hand on top of it, covering it completely. He looked at Logan. "You see, Logan," Richard said, his voice calm. "This is the kind of creative thinking I've been asking for." My stomach dropped. Richard turned to me. His eyes were cold, devoid of gratitude. "We will process this immediately. Tegan, you have done adequately." Adequately? I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. "Father, this is my entire savings. This is my plan." "And you work for this company," Vanessa interjected, her voice smooth as silk. "You are doing your job. Tegan, it is expected that family sacrifices for the family." "But," I started. "That will be all," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. "We have a lot of work to do to implement this. Go back to your desk." I stood there, frozen. They were stealing it, right in front of my face. They were taking my money and my mind, and they were going to feed it to the beast that was Logan's reputation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to snatch the folder back and tear up the check, but I didn't. I couldn't, because deep down, a pathetic part of me still hoped. I hoped that if the company was saved, if the crisis was averted, maybe, just maybe, at the victory dinner, they would mention my name. Maybe they would raise a glass to me. I turned and walked out of the office. I did not go back to my desk. I walked down to the lobby, to the center of the atrium where a massive scale model of the Lake Verity project stood under a glass case. It was a beautiful model. Tiny trees made of green sponge, little plastic people walking dogs, miniature cars parked in driveways. It looked perfect. It looked idyllic. I stared at the miniature clubhouse, the place where the grand opening would eventually be held. I looked at the tiny plastic figure of a woman standing near the entrance. She looked happy. She had no idea. She was just a piece of plastic in a rich man's game. I saw my reflection in the glass case. I looked tired. I looked small. I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut that felt like swallowing lead, that I was about to be used. I knew they would take the credit. I knew Logan would be the hero. But I did not know how far they would go. I did not know that saving the company would not be enough for them. I did not know that my competence was not just convenient. It was a threat, and threats in the Cooper family were not just ignored. They were eliminated. I placed my hand on the cool glass. "Enjoy it while you can," I whispered to the empty lobby. 2 days later, the invitations for the victory dinner went out. I received mine via interoffice mail, like any other low-level employee. The Cooper family celebrates the salvation of the Verity Project. I stared at the heavy cream cardstock. I would go. I would wear my best dress. I would sit at that table, and I would wait to see if my father had a shred of honor left in his soul. I was such a fool. The dining room of the Cooper estate was designed to intimidate, It was a cavernous hall inspired by the Palace of Versailles, dripping with crystal chandeliers that cast a fractured, diamond-hard light onto the table below. The walls were lined with oil paintings of ancestors who had never actually existed, purchased by Vanessa at estate sales to manufacture a lineage for a family whose blood was made of mortar and ambition. Tonight, the room was suffocating. The air smelled of roasted duck, expensive perfume, and the distinct metallic scent of impending betrayal. I sat near the middle of the long mahogany table, squeezed between a zoning commissioner and the wife of a bank executive. I had dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing a navy blue sheath dress that I had bought with my first paycheck. It was modest, professional, the uniform of a woman who wanted to be taken seriously. Around me, the other guests glittered in sequins and silk, a sea of peacocks preening for Richard's approval. The mood was electric. Everyone knew the company had been on the brink. Everyone knew that tonight was the declaration of survival. At the head of the table, Richard held court. He looked revitalized, the gray pallor of the last few weeks replaced by a flush of triumph. He laughed loudly at jokes that were not funny, his voice booming off the vaulted ceiling. Vanessa sat at the opposite end, the perfect hostess, her eyes scanning the room like a surveillance drone, ensuring every wine glass was full and every conversation remained superficial. Logan sat to Richard's right. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my car. He looked smug, swirling his scotch with an air of unearned confidence. He did not look like a man who had almost driven a legacy into the ground. He looked like a man who had already forgotten the fire because someone else had put it out. There was a new face at the table, seated in the shadows near the sideboard, almost an afterthought. Richard had introduced him briefly during cocktails. "This is Samuel Hart," Richard had said, waving a hand dismissively. "Our new strategic legal advisor. He is here to help us tidy up the paperwork for the restructuring." Samuel did not look like the typical Cooper associate. He was not young, he was not flashy, and he did not smile. He wore a brown suit that had gone out of style 2 decades ago, and he ate his meal with mechanical precision. Throughout the first 2 courses, I caught him looking at me. It was not a lecherous gaze, nor was it friendly. It was analytical. He looked at me the way a scientist looks at a specimen in a jar, waiting to see how it reacts to a stimulus. I tried to ignore him. I was too focused on the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I was waiting for the toast. I was waiting for the moment Richard would tell the room how the company was saved. I did not expect a parade. I did not expect a statue, but I expected the truth. I expected him to say that his daughter had stepped up. The waiters cleared the main course. The room grew quiet as the sommelier poured the vintage Bordeaux. The heavy crystal glasses chimed softly as they were set down. Richard stood up. He tapped a spoon against his glass. The sharp, clear sound cut through the murmurs, bringing the room to a reverent silence. "Friends, colleagues, family," Richard began, his voice dropping to a register of solemn gravity. "We have weathered a storm. The last few months have tested the very foundation of the Cooper Group. The market turned against us. The winds of economic change blew cold. There were whispers that we would not survive." He paused for effect. He was a master storyteller, even when the story was a lie. "But the Cooper name is not built on sand." He continued, "It is built on resilience. It is built on vision. And in our darkest hour, when the wolves were at the door, it was leadership that saved us." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was it. I looked down at my hands, clenched in my lap. "It requires a special kind of courage to take risks," Richard said, his eyes beaming with pride. "It requires a modern mind to navigate modern problems. I am proud to say that the future of this company is secure, thanks to the bold, decisive actions of my son, Logan." The room erupted in applause. I felt the blood drain from my face. The sound of the clapping was like a physical blow. I looked up, stunned. Richard was raising his glass to Logan. Logan was standing up, feigning modesty, nodding to the room as if he were a war hero returning home. Logan identified the restructuring opportunity. Richard lied, his voice smooth and untroubled by conscience. He secured the bridge capital. He navigated the complex waters of our debt obligations. He saved us. I could not breathe. It was not just an omission, it was a theft, a complete, total erasure of my existence. They were not just taking credit for my work, they were taking credit for my money, my grandmother's money. I looked at Vanessa. She was clapping delicately, a serene smile plastered on her face. She knew. She had seen the check. She had seen the plan. I looked at Logan. He caught my eye and smirked. It was a small, quick expression, there and gone in a second, but it said everything. You are nothing, it said. You are the help. The applause began to die down. Logan was opening his mouth to speak, to accept the praise he had not earned. No. The word came out of my mouth before I could stop it. It was not loud, but in the sudden quiet of the room, it was audible. Richard froze. He looked down the table at me, his eyebrows knitting together. "Excuse me, Tegan?" he asked, his tone warning me to stop. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, a harsh, discordant sound that made the guests flinch. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but my hands were fists. I said no, I repeated, my voice gaining strength. That is a lie. The silence that descended on the room was absolute. The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. The zoning commissioner next to me shifted his chair away, as if I were radioactive. Richard's face hardened. "Sit down. Tegan, you are drunk." "I have not had a drop of wine," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and adrenaline. Logan did not save the company. Logan caused the crisis. He overspent on the Verity materials. He ignored the debt covenants. "Tegan," Vanessa said, her voice sharp, "that is enough. Do not embarrass yourself." I turned to her. Embarrass myself? I am the one who walked into Father's office 3 days ago. I am the one who drafted the restructuring plan on my kitchen table because Logan was too busy golfing to read the balance sheet. And I am the one who wrote the check. I looked directly at Richard. "Tell them, Father, tell them whose name was on the check for $600,000. Tell them whose life savings paid the vendors this morning so you could keep the lights on." Richard stared at me. His eyes were cold, dead things. He did not look ashamed. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man dealing with an unruly servant. "It was a family contribution," Richard said dismissively. "It was handled." "It was my money," I shouted, the decorum finally shattering. $600,000. That was everything Grandma Eleanor left me. You took it, and now you are giving him the credit? Logan laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Oh, come on. Tegan?" Logan sneered. "You think your little piggy bank saved the empire? You are delusional. You are an administrative assistant. You do not even understand high finance. Dad just took your check to make you feel involved. We probably did not even cash it." I felt tears stinging my eyes, not tears of sadness, but of pure, hot frustration. "I saw the transaction record," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw the withdrawal. You stole from me. You are liars. All of you." Vanessa stood up then. She moved with the fluid grace of a viper. She walked down the length of the table, her silk dress rustling softly. She stopped right in front of me. She smelled of Chanel and malice. "You are ruining a celebration." "Tegan," she said, her voice low and dangerous, intended only for me and the people immediately around us, but in the acoustic perfection of the room, everyone heard it. "I am telling the truth," I said. "The truth?" Vanessa laughed. It was a cruel, tinkling sound. "The truth is that you are jealous. You have always been jealous of Logan. You are a sad, lonely girl who thinks that if she buys her way in, Daddy will finally love her." She leaned in closer, her face inches from mine. "You are not a savior. Tegan, you are a failure. You are a receptionist with delusions of grandeur. You think anyone here believes you have $600,000? You think anyone here believes a girl who buys her shoes at a discount store knows how to run a conglomerate?" The guests tittered. I heard a few chuckles. The narrative was shifting. Vanessa was spinning it in real time. I was not the victim. I was the hysterical, jealous sister. "I am not lying," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You are pathetic," Vanessa hissed. "You are a stain on this family. You always have been. Your mother was weak, and so are you." Something inside me snapped. The mention of my mother was the line. I opened my mouth to scream, to curse her, to burn the whole house down with my words. But Vanessa was faster. She reached out to the table. Her hand closed around a large crystal goblet filled with red wine, a 1998 Cabernet, heavy and dark as blood. In one fluid motion, she brought her arm up. She did not throw the wine, she poured it. She upended the goblet directly over my head. I gasped. As the Cogdigue liquid hit my scalp, it drenched my hair, ran down my face, soaked into the fabric of my navy dress. It dripped into my eyes, stinging them. I could taste the tannins and the oak on my lips. I stood there, frozen in shock, the red liquid dripping off my nose and chin onto the pristine white tablecloth. The room went silent for a heartbeat. Then, Vanessa smiled. "Oops," she said. Her voice was devoid of apology. "I think you need to cool off." I wiped the wine from my eyes, blinking to clear my vision. I looked at her. I saw the pure, unadulterated hatred in her eyes. I started. And then she hit me. It was not a slap of passion. It was a slap of correction. She drew her hand back and brought it across my face with shocking force. The sound was like a pistol crack. The force of the blow caught me off guard. My heels slipped on the polished floor. I stumbled backward. My chair legs caught on the rug. I fell. I crashed onto the floor. Hard. My elbow struck the wood. The pain was sharp and immediate. I lay there, sprawled on the Persian rug, covered in wine, my cheek burning, my dignity shattered. For a second, there was silence. And then, it started. It began with Logan. He let out a snort of laughter. "Look at her," he crowed. "She looks like a drowned rat." Then Richard chuckled, a deep rumble of amusement. Vanessa began to laugh, a high, relieved sound, as if she had just performed a magic trick. And then the guests joined in. The zoning commissioner, the banker's wife, the investors, the friends. They all started laughing. They were laughing at the spectacle. They were laughing because the Coopers were laughing. And in this world, you followed the lead of the powerful. The sound was deafening. It was a cacophony of cruelty. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling, bouncing around the room, amplifying until it felt like the walls were screaming at me. I lay there, looking up at the chandelier. The light fractured through my tear-filled eyes, turning into a kaleidoscope of blurry stars. I felt small. I felt erased. But then, through the forest of table legs and expensive shoes, I saw him. Samuel Hart. He had not moved. He was still sitting in his chair at the edge of the room. He was not laughing. His hands were folded on the table in front of him. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were locked on me. He was not looking at me with pity. He was looking at me with intensity. And then, his eyes shifted. Slowly, deliberately. He looked up. He looked toward the corner of the room, near the ceiling, where a decorative molding met the wall. I followed his gaze. There, hidden amidst the intricate woodwork, was a tiny, blinking red light. It was the lens of the internal security camera system, the system Richard had installed to monitor the staff, to ensure no one stole the silverware. I froze. The camera. It was recording. It was recording everything: the speech, the lie, the confrontation, the wine, the slap, the laughter. I looked back at Samuel. He looked at the camera, then he looked back at me. For a split second, the mask slipped. In his eyes, I saw something that looked like urgency, something that looked like a warning. "Remember this," his eyes seemed to say. "Do not forget where the weapon is." The laughter around me continued, a symphony of the grotesque. Vanessa was calling for a towel, her voice mocking. Richard was pouring another drink. But the noise began to fade into the background. My cheek throbbed, and the wine was cold and sticky against my skin. But a new sensation was taking root in my chest. It was not shame anymore. It was clarity. I looked at the red light again. Blink, blink, blink. It was a heartbeat. It was a witness. I pushed myself up to my elbows. I looked at my family, laughing and pointing, thinking they had won, thinking they had put the upstart girl back in her place. They did not know. They did not know that the man sitting in the corner, the man they thought was just another paid suit, was watching them with the eyes of an executioner. And they did not know that the blinking red light above their heads was capturing the evidence that would one day burn their kingdom to the ground. I wiped the wine from my mouth with the back of my hand. I did not cry. Not anymore. I just watched the light blink. The morning sun that hit the glass facade of the Cooper Group headquarters felt less like a new beginning and more like an interrogation lamp. I stood on the sidewalk at 8 o'clock in the morning, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face. My cheek still throbbed where Vanessa's ring had caught the skin the night before. A tender, purple reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. I had tried to swipe my badge at the turnstile 3 minutes earlier. The little light, usually a welcoming green, had flashed a harsh, unforgiving red. Access denied. The security guard, a man named Miller who I had brought coffee to for 3 years, could not even look me in the eye. "I have orders." "Ms. Cooper," he had mumbled, staring at his boots, "you are to be escorted to HR immediately. Do not stop at your desk." So, here I was, walking the familiar hallway to the Human Resources Department, flanked by 2 security officers as if I were a corporate spy caught stealing state secrets. The office was buzzing with the morning rush. Phones ringing, printers humming, heads turned as I passed. Whispers trailed in my wake like exhaust fumes. They knew. In a company like this, bad news traveled faster than light. I was ushered into the office of Janice Miller, the VP of Human Resources. Janice was a woman who had survived 20 years at the Cooper Group by having no spine and a very selective memory. She sat behind her desk, hands clasped over a file that I knew contained the end of my career. "Sit down." "Tegan," she said. Her voice was professional, detached. I did not sit. I stood, gripping the back of the guest chair, my knuckles white. "Why is my badge deactivated?" "Janice?" I asked. Janice opened the folder. She did not look up. "Effective immediately. Your employment with the Cooper Group is terminated for cause." "For cause?" I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "What cause? Saving the company from bankruptcy?" "Gross misconduct," Janice read from the paper, "creating a hostile work environment, public intoxication at a company-sanctioned event, assaulting a senior executive." I stared at her. My mouth fell open. "Assault?" I repeated. "Vanessa hit me. She poured wine on me and slapped me in front of 50 witnesses. We have witness statements from Mr. Cooper and Mr. Logan Cooper indicating that you were the aggressor." "Tegan," Janice said, finally looking up. Her eyes were empty. "They state you were drunk, belligerent, and that Vanessa acted in self-defense." "This is insane," I said, my voice rising. "You cannot be serious. There are cameras. Check the tapes." I waited for her to flinch. I waited for her to acknowledge the truth. But Janice just closed the folder. "The matter is closed. Tegan, you are to collect your personal effects under supervision and leave the premises. If you return, you will be trespassing." I leaned over the desk. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like it could melt the steel beams of the building. "What about my money?" I asked. Janice blinked. "What money?" "The $600,000, I said, enunciating every word. "The money I transferred to the operating account 3 days ago. The money that paid the vendors this morning. If I am fired, I want my loan repaid, immediately." Janice looked confused. She flipped through the file again. "There is no record of a loan." "Tegan," she said. I felt the floor drop out from under me. "I checked with finance this morning," she continued. "There was a capital injection, yes, but it was flagged as a family contribution, a donation. There is no promissory note. There is no repayment schedule. Richard? He had not just taken the credit. He had structured the transaction to look like a gift. He knew I would not ask for a contract. He knew I would trust the unwritten code of family honor. He had played me. He had taken my grandmother's legacy, the only thing that gave me independence, and he had swallowed it whole. "I am going to sue you," I whispered. "I am going to sue this entire building." "You signed a binding arbitration agreement when you were hired." "Tegan," Janice said softly, "and without a contract for the money, well, it is your word against the chairman's." She stood up. "Security will help you with your box." The walk to my desk was a blur. I felt like I was moving underwater. I packed my things mechanically, a framed photo of my mother, a dried flower from my graduation, my favorite stapler, meaningless trinkets of a life I had wasted trying to please people who hated me. Logan was standing in the doorway of his office, watching me. He was drinking a latte, looking fresh and rested. He did not say a word. He just smiled, a small, satisfied quirk of his lips. He raised his cup in a mock toast. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the stapler at his head. But I knew that was what they wanted. They wanted the crazy, unstable daughter. I took a deep breath. I picked up my box. As I turned to leave, my eyes fell on the printer tray next to my desk. It was empty, except for one single sheet of paper that had gotten jammed in the back. I reached out and pulled it free. It was the cash flow analysis spreadsheet I had created the week before. It showed the date, the deficit, and the line item. T. Cooper, personal injection, $600,000. It was not a contract. It was not a promissory note, but it was proof that the money had come from me. I folded the paper and shoved it into my pocket. I walked out of the towering glass building and into the gray Minneapolis morning. I had no job. I had no savings. I had no family. I was 26 years old, and I had nothing but a cardboard box and a bruise on my face. My apartment was a small one-bedroom unit in the Uptown district, miles away from the manicured lawns of my father's estate. It was drafty. The radiator clanked, and the view was of a brick wall, but it was mine. I spent the afternoon sitting on my floor, staring at the wall. The silence was heavy. I replayed the dinner over and over in my head, the laughter, the slap, the look in Samuel Hart's eyes. Why hadn't he smiled? The question kept nagging at me. Everyone else had laughed. Even the waitstaff had smirked. But Samuel Hart, the man Richard had introduced as a fixer, had looked afraid. The sun went down, casting long shadows across my living room. I was calculating how long I could pay rent on my credit cards. 2 months? Maybe 3 if I ate ramen noodles. Then there was a sound. A soft thud at my front door. I froze. I was not expecting anyone. I had not ordered food. I waited a moment, my heart beating in my throat. Then, I stood up and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. There was no one there. The hallway was silent, but lying on the welcome mat was a plain manila envelope. There was no name on it, no return address, just a thick, heavy envelope sealed with tape. I picked it up. It felt substantial. I stepped back inside and locked the door, my hands trembling. I sat down at my small kitchen table and tore the envelope open. Inside, there was a stack of photocopied documents. They smelled faintly of old paper and dust. I pulled them out. The first page was a cover sheet. It was blank. I turned it over. The second page made my breath catch in my throat. It was a photocopy of a handwritten document. The handwriting was spidery, elegant, and unmistakably familiar. It was my grandmother's handwriting, Eleanor Cooper. I traced the letters with my finger. The date at the top was November 14th, 7 years ago, exactly 1 week before she died. Last will and testament of Eleanor Grace Cooper. I frowned. I had seen Grandma's will. It was a standard legal document, typed, notarized, and filed with the county. It left her entire estate, including her 51% controlling interest in the Cooper Group, to her only son. Richard Cooper. That will was the reason Richard was the king. But this was different. I began to read. I, Eleanor Cooper, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all prior wills and codicils. My eyes raced down the page. My son, Richard, has the ambition of a king but the heart of a tyrant. He sees the company as a crown, not a responsibility. My grandson, Logan, has been spoiled by excess and lacks the discipline to build. I felt a chill run down my spine. She had known. Even back then, she had known. Therefore, I leave my entire voting interest in Cooper Group Holdings, constituting 51% of the total shares, to the only member of this family who understands the value of a dollar and the weight of a promise. I leave everything to my granddaughter, Tegan Cooper. I gasped. The paper shook in my hands. 51%. If this document was real, Richard did not own the company. I did. I was the majority shareholder. I was the boss. I flipped to the next page. It detailed the trust fund, the $600,000, and explicitly stated it was to be used for my protection and independence. And then, at the bottom of the last page, were the signatures. Eleanor Cooper. Her signature was shaky, written by a dying hand, but it was hers. And below it, the signature of the witness. Samuel Hart, attorney at law. I dropped the paper. Samuel Hart. The man at the table. The man who had watched me get slapped. The man who had looked at the camera. He had been her lawyer. I scrambled for my laptop. I opened the browser and logged into the Hennepin County Court record system. I had access from my time handling the company's real estate filings. I searched for the probate records of Eleanor Cooper. The file loaded. I pulled up the official will, the one that had been probated 7 years ago. I put the two documents side by side on my table, the digital version on my screen and the photocopy in my hand. The official will was dated November 10th, 4 days before the handwritten one. It was typed, it was polished, and it was signed by Eleanor. But as I looked closer at the signature on the screen, I saw it. It was too smooth. It lacked the tremor of a woman in the final stages of Parkinson's disease. It looked like a tracing, a forgery. And the witnesses on the official will? 2 names I did not recognize. Staff members from the hospice care facility, probably paid off. But the lawyer listed on the official probate filing. I scrolled down. Legal representative, Samuel Hart. I sat back, my mind reeling. Samuel Hart had filed the fake will. He had helped Richard steal the company from me 7 years ago. He was part of the conspiracy. But then, why send me this? Why send me the evidence of his own crime? I looked at the envelope again. I turned it upside down and shook it. A small, yellow sticky note fluttered out. I picked it up. There were 3 words written on it in block letters, ink heavy and dark. Look closer. S. I stared at the note. S. Samuel. My mind flashed back to the dinner, the way he had looked at the camera, the way he had refused to join in the laughter. He was the one who had filed the fake will. Yes, but something had changed, or perhaps he had been forced. I looked at the date on the handwritten will again, November 14th. I looked at the date of the dinner party, November 14th. The anniversary. The dinner had been on the 7th anniversary of the day my grandmother signed this document, the day she tried to give me the company. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the paper. This was not just about a stolen $600,000 anymore. This was about a stolen empire. This was about a stolen life. Richard and Vanessa had not just mistreated me. They had committed fraud. They had forged a will. They had stolen millions of dollars worth of stock. And they had done it with the help of Samuel Hart. But now, the wolf had turned. I looked around my small, cheap apartment. 10 minutes ago, I was a fired, broke, humiliated girl. Now, I held a piece of paper that could destroy the most powerful real estate tycoon in Minneapolis. But I knew it would not be easy. A photocopy was not proof. I needed the original. I needed to prove the other will was a forgery. and I was up against a man who owned judges, police officers, and the media. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the brick wall. They thought they had broken me. They thought that by taking my job and my money, they had taken my power. They were wrong. They had just given me the map to the bodies buried in the basement. I walked back to the table and picked up the handwritten will. I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. I would not sleep here tonight. It was not safe. If Richard knew this document existed, if he knew Samuel had leaked it, I grabbed my coat. I grabbed the box of files I had taken from the office. I was done crying. I was done asking for approval. The Tegan Cooper who wanted her father's love died last night on that dining room floor. The Tegan Cooper who was going to take back what was hers had just been born. I opened the door and stepped out into the night. The envelope pressed against my chest like a shield. I had work to do. I spent the next 48 hours existing on a diet of stale coffee and adrenaline, turning the internet inside out. I was looking for a ghost. Samuel Hart. The name felt heavy in my mouth. 7 years ago, he had been a fixture in the legal community, a man known for handling high-net-worth estates with discretion and ironclad efficiency, but now, he was a phantom. His LinkedIn profile had not been updated in 6 years. His website was a dead link that redirected to a generic domain parking page. I called the Minnesota State Bar Association, pretending to be a prospective client. The receptionist, a woman with a nasal voice who sounded like she was chewing gum, told me that Mr. Hart had voluntarily surrendered his license and retired to private life 5 years ago. Private life, that was code for hiding. I needed a lead. I dug deeper, trawling through cached versions of his old law firm's website on the Wayback Machine. I found a staff directory from 8 years ago. Most of the associates had moved on to big firms like Dorsey or Fagra, climbing the ladder, but there was one name listed as his senior paralegal, Marla Jensen. I ran her name. It was easier to find. She was not hiding. She was working as a notary and a shift manager at a bowling alley in Crystal, a working-class suburb 20 minutes north of the city. I drove my beat-up sedan out there on a gray Tuesday afternoon. The bowling alley smelled of floor wax, cheap beer, and fried onions. The sound of pins crashing was constant, a rhythmic violence that made my headache worse. I found Marla behind the shoe rental counter. She was a woman in her late 50s, with dyed red hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of a life that had not turned out the way she planned. She was spraying disinfectant into a pair of size 10 bowling shoes. "Marla Jensen?" I asked, leaning on the counter. She looked up, her eyes guarded. "Who is asking?" "My name is Tegan Cooper." The reaction was immediate. It was as if I had slapped her. Marla dropped the can of spray. It clattered onto the linoleum floor. She took a step back, her face draining of color. Her hands, which had been steady a moment ago, started to tremble. "Cooper?" she whispered. "You are Richard's girl?" "I am Eleanor's granddaughter," I corrected. "I need to talk to you about Samuel Hart." Marla shook her head violently. "No, no way. I am not doing this. I do not know where he is. I do not know anything. You need to leave." She turned to flee into the back office, but I reached out and grabbed her wrist. It was a desperate move, one I would never have made a week ago, but I was not the same person anymore. "Please," I said, my voice low and urgent. "They just fired me. They stole my inheritance. I have a copy of the handwritten will. Marla. I know Samuel filed the fake one." Marla stopped. She looked at my hand on her arm, then up at my face. She searched my eyes, looking for the deception she had come to expect from anyone carrying the name Cooper. She did not find it. She saw the bruise on my cheek that makeup could not fully hide. She pulled her arm away, but she did not run. She looked around the alley to make sure no one was listening. "You have the handwritten will?" she hissed. "Yes." Marla let out a shuddering breath. She leaned over the counter, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Sam told me he destroyed it. He told me he burned it the night Richard threatened to ruin him." "Richard threatened him?" I asked, my heart pounding. Marla's eyes were wide with a fear that felt years old, a fear that had been marinating in silence. Richard Cooper destroyed Sam's life, she said. He dug up dirt on Sam's family, things that would have sent Sam's son to prison. He blackmailed him. Sam had to file that forgery. He had no choice. It broke him. Tegan, he was a good man. But your father is a monster. Where is he? Marla? I asked. If I'm going to fight them, I need him. Marla looked at me with pity. You cannot fight them. Honey, you are just a girl. They will crush you. I am not just a girl, I said, thinking of the red light blinking in the dining room. I have evidence, but I need Samuel to authenticate it. Marla hesitated. She looked at the bowling lanes, then back at me. She grabbed a napkin and a pen. She scribbled something down quickly, her hand shaking so bad the letters were barely legible. He moved to Wisconsin, a cabin near Lake Superior. He wanted to be where the cell reception could not reach him. She slid the napkin across the counter. Do not tell him I gave you this. And for God's sake, watch your back. If Richard knows you are digging, he will not just fire you. I took the napkin. Thank you, Marla. Go, she said, turning back to the shoes. Before I regret this. I walked out of the bowling alley, clutching the napkin like a lifeline. I had a location. I had a witness. But when I got back to my apartment, I realized that Marla's warning had come too late. The door to my unit was unlocked. I stood in the hallway, the keys in my hand, my blood turning to ice. I knew I had locked it. I was paranoid about security now. I had checked the deadbolt twice before leaving. I pushed the door open slowly. My apartment, my sanctuary, had been violated. It was not a robbery. It was a search. The sofa cushions were slashed open, stuffing spilling out like white guts. My books were pulled off the shelves, their spines broken. My clothes were pulled out of the closet and trampled on the floor. My laptop, which I had foolishly left hidden under the bed, was gone. I stepped inside, the glass of a broken picture frame crunching under my boot. The violation felt physical, nauseating. They had been here. They had touched my things. I rushed to the kitchen table. That was where I had left the envelope with the copy of the will. I stopped dead. The table was the only thing in the room that had not been overturned. In the center of the table, amidst the chaos of the ransacked apartment, the manila envelope sat perfectly square. It had not been taken. I walked over to it, my legs feeling like lead. I opened it. The will was still there. My heart hammered against my ribs. Why? Why leave it? If they wanted to destroy the evidence, why leave the most damning piece of paper? Then I understood. It was a message. Taking it would imply they were afraid of it. Leaving it was a power move. They were telling me that it did not matter what I had. They were telling me that a piece of paper could not hurt them. They were telling me that they could get to me whenever they wanted, wherever I was, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I jumped, a small scream escaping my throat. I pulled the phone out. It was a text message from a blocked number. I opened it. Stop before it is too late. Next time we will not be so polite. I dropped the phone on the table. Panic clawed at my throat. I wanted to run. I wanted to drive away and never come back. I was 26 years old. I was fighting a billionaire. I was alone. But then I looked at the will again. I looked at my grandmother's shaky signature. I leave everything to my granddaughter, Tegan Cooper. She had believed in me when no one else did. She had trusted me to be strong enough to handle this. If I ran now, Richard won. If I ran now, Vanessa won. I grabbed the envelope. I grabbed my phone. I left the apartment. I could not stay there. It was compromised. I drove to a 24-hour diner and sat in a booth in the back, shivering despite the heat. I needed help, real help. I could not afford a lawyer. Corbin, the shark who represented the family, would eat any public defender for breakfast. I pulled out my phone and searched for Legal Aid Minneapolis fraud. One name kept coming up in the forums and news articles. Brightline Legal Advocacy. They were a non-profit firm known for taking on impossible cases against corporate giants. They were the ones who had sued the chemical plant in Duluth and won. I looked at the clock. It was 4 in the afternoon. Their office closed at 5. I drove like a maniac across town. The Brightline office was located in a converted warehouse in the North Loop. It was nothing like the Cooper headquarters. There was no marble, no security guards, just exposed brick and people running around with too many files and not enough coffee. I walked up to the receptionist, a young guy with a nose ring. "I need to speak to a lawyer." I said, "It is an emergency." "Do you have an appointment?" he asked, not looking up from his screen. "No, but I have a whistleblower case involving the Cooper Group." That got his attention. He looked up. "The Cooper Group?" he repeated. I nodded. "I have proof of inheritance fraud, embezzlement, and a cover-up involving a prominent attorney." He picked up the phone immediately. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a small, glass-walled conference room. A woman walked in. She was striking. She had dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, sharp features, and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. She wore a simple black suit that looked like armor. She did not smile. She did not offer me coffee. She sat down opposite me and placed a notepad on the table. "I am Alicia Romero," she said. "I am the lead litigator here. I used to be a federal prosecutor. My receptionist says you are throwing around some very heavy accusations against Richard Cooper." "I am Tegan Cooper," I said, "his daughter." Alicia raised an eyebrow. "The daughter? Why are you here, Ms. Cooper?" "Usually, when family members come to us, they are looking for a way to get out of a DUI quietly." "I am not here for a favor," I said. "I am here for justice." I pushed the manila envelope across the table. Alicia opened it. She read the cover letter. She read the will. She looked at the signature. She looked at the witness name. "Samuel Hart," she murmured. "I wondered what happened to him." She looked up at me. "This is a photocopy." "I know where the original is." I lied. Or at least, I had a lead. Alicia leaned back in her chair. "Do you have any idea what you are starting?" she asked. "If this is real, it is not just a civil dispute. Forging a will to seize control of a public company is a federal crime. It is wire fraud. It is securities fraud. It is racketeering." "I know," I said. "Why now?" Alicia asked, her eyes boring into mine. "This will is 7 years old. Why bring it to me today?" I took a deep breath. I thought about the wine dripping down my face. I thought about the laughter. I thought about the apartment trashed by my father's goons. "Because 3 nights ago, they held a dinner," I said, my voice steady. "They laughed while my stepmother beat me in front of 50 people. They stole $600,000 of my own money and claimed it was a donation. They fired me. They trashed my apartment." I leaned forward. "They thought that because they had beaten me down for my entire life, I would just take it. They thought I was weak. They thought I would not dare to stand up to the great Richard Cooper." I looked Alicia dead in the eye. They were wrong. Alicia held my gaze for a long moment. The skepticism in her eyes slowly faded, replaced by a glint of steel. She recognized the look on my face. It was the look of someone with nothing left to lose. She closed the file and placed her hand on it. "Brightline cannot take this case," she said. My heart sank. "What?" "Because this is too big for a nonprofit legal aid clinic," she continued. "However," she pulled a business card from her pocket. "I still have friends at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I still have my badge, essentially, even if I do not wear it anymore. If we are going to do this, Tegan, we are not going to sue them for damages. We are not going to settle for a payout." She slid the card across the table. It simply said, "Alicia Romero, Senior Counsel. We are going to build a criminal case. We are going to build a RICO case. We are going to take the entire board of directors down." She looked at the bruise on my cheek. "Are you ready for war?" she asked. I thought about the blinking red light. I thought about Samuel Hart hiding in a cabin. I thought about the smirk on Logan's face. "I am not just ready," I said. "I have already started." Alicia picked up her phone. "Good," she said. "Start talking. I want every detail. I want dates. I want bank account numbers. I want to know everything about Samuel Hart." I began to speak. For the next 3 hours. I poured everything out. The years of neglect, the fake job titles, the liquidity crisis, the check, the dinner, the camera. When I got to the part about the camera, Alicia stopped writing. "Wait," she said. "You said there was a camera in the dining room?" "Yes," I said. "A security camera, hidden in the molding." "And Samuel Hart looked at it?" "Yes." Alicia smiled. It was a terrifying shark-like smile. "If that footage exists," she said, "we do not just have a case, we have a nuke." She stood up and paced the small room. "We need to get to Samuel Hart before they do," she said. "If they trashed your apartment, they are cleaning house. They know there is a loose end." "We have to go to Wisconsin," I said. Alicia nodded. "We leave at dawn. But first, we need to file a protective order and get this on the official record. Once the FBI opens a file, if anything happens to you, it becomes a federal investigation immediately. It is your only shield right now." She opened the door and shouted to the receptionist, "Get me the U.S. attorney on the line, now." I sat back in the chair. I was exhausted. I was homeless. I was terrified. But as I watched Alicia Romero bark orders into the phone, mobilizing the machinery of justice, I felt the first flicker of hope I had felt in years. Everyone had laughed when I fell, but no one was laughing now. The summons came via a text message from a number I did not have saved, but I recognized the tone immediately. It was curt, commanding, and presumed compliance. "Lake Verity Model Home, number 4, 8 o'clock tonight. Come alone. We need to settle this." It was Richard's diction sent from a burner phone. I sat in the passenger seat of Alicia's car, staring at the screen. We were parked 2 blocks away from the entrance to the Lake Verity development. The engine was off, and the silence in the car was heavy. Outside, the Minnesota twilight was bleeding into a dark, starless night. "Do not sign anything," Alicia said, her voice cutting through the gloom. "Do not agree to anything. Your only goal is to get them talking." I adjusted the collar of my coat. Beneath the layers of wool and silk, taped securely to the underside of my bra, was a digital recording device the size of a stick of gum. It was high fidelity, capable of picking up a whisper from across a room. "I am terrified," I admitted. "Good," Alicia said. "Use that. Let them see the fear. They feed on it. If they think you are scared, they will get sloppy. They will get arrogant. And arrogant people make mistakes." I looked at her. What if they hurt me? "They won't," Alicia said, though her eyes were hard. "Not at the model home. It is too public, too risky. They want to buy you off. Tegan, they want to bury this before the FBI starts digging up their flower beds. But just in case." She tapped the dashboard. "I have a tracker on your phone and the recorder is transmitting to a cloud server in real time. If the signal drops, or if you are in there longer than 30 minutes, I am calling the police." I nodded. I took a deep breath, trying to slow the frantic rhythm of my heart. I was walking into the lion's den, armed with nothing but a wire and a prayer. I opened the car door. The cold air hit me like a physical blow. "Let's go fishing," Alicia whispered. I drove my own car the final 2 blocks, parking in the pristine, freshly paved driveway of Model Home number 4. The Lake Verity project was my father's pride and joy, a sprawling complex of luxury lakeside villas designed for the ultra-wealthy. It was also the project that had almost bankrupted us, the project I had saved with my own money. The house was dark except for a single light in the living room. It loomed against the night sky, a modern structure of glass and timber that looked more like a fortress than a home. I walked up the path. The landscaping was perfect. Manicured bushes, stone pavers, not a blade of grass out of place. It was a beautiful lie, just like the family waiting inside. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into the foyer. The smell hit me first, new paint, sawdust, and that specific sterile scent of a house that no one has ever lived in. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as I walked toward the living room. They were waiting for me. Richard was standing by the fireplace. Though there was no fire lit, he was wearing a casual cashmere sweater, trying to project an image of relaxed paternal warmth. Vanessa sat on a white buccal sofa, her legs crossed, a cup of tea in her hand. Logan was pacing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the black water of the lake. "Ah, Tegan," Richard said, turning as I entered. "Thank you for coming." I stopped in the middle of the room. I kept my hands in my pockets, ensuring I did not accidentally brush against the wire. "You said we needed to talk," I said. My voice sounded small in the large, empty room. I channeled the fear I was feeling, letting it tremble in my tone. Vanessa set her tea down. She looked at me with an expression of expertly crafted concern. It was a look I had seen her use 1,000 times on donors and press cameras. "We are worried about you, sweetie," Vanessa cooed. "Worried?" I asked. "You had me fired. You trashed my apartment. You threatened me." Logan stopped pacing and snorted. "We did not trash your apartment. Tegan, you probably did that yourself in a drunken rage, just like you ruined the dinner." Richard held up a hand, silencing him. "Please, let's not rehash the past," Richard said smoothly. "We are here to talk about the future." He walked over to the kitchen island, where a leather portfolio lay. He picked it up and brought it to the coffee table. "We realize that things have become strained," Richard said, "and we acknowledge that your departure from the company was abrupt. We want to make things right." I watched him. He was playing the benevolent patriarch. It was a role he won awards for. "Make it right?" I repeated. "You stole my inheritance. You stole the credit for my work." Richard sighed, as if explaining tax law to a toddler. "Tegan, you are confused. You have been under a lot of stress. We know you have been seeing some radical lawyers, people who want to use you to get to us. We do not want to see you get hurt in a public legal battle that you cannot win." He tapped the portfolio. "So, we have prepared a severance package, a very generous one." He opened the folder and slid a document toward me. I looked down at the paper. It was a settlement agreement. My eyes scanned the legal jargon until they hit the number in the middle of the page. $1 million. It was a staggering amount of money. It was enough to replace my savings and then some. It was enough to move away, start over, and never think about the name Cooper again. But then I looked at the conditions. The undersigned agrees to a lifetime non-disclosure agreement regarding all family and company matters. The undersigned retracts all claims of financial impropriety. The undersigned agrees to surrender all copies of any personal documents related to the estate of Eleanor Cooper. I looked up at Richard. "You want to buy me," I said. "We want to help you," Vanessa corrected softly. "Tegan, look at yourself. You are living in a dump. You have no job. You are chasing ghosts. Take the money. Go to Europe. Find yourself. Be happy." "And if I don't?" I asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa's smile did not waver, but her eyes went flat and cold. "If you don't," Vanessa said, her voice dropping an octave, "then we will have to release the full context of what happened at the dinner party." I frowned. "What context? You hit me." Vanessa reached for her phone. She tapped the screen and held it up. It was the video of the dinner, but it was not the raw footage I had seen in my head. It was edited. It started earlier, showing me drinking water, which, with the right filter, looked like vodka. It showed me standing up aggressively. It showed me shouting, and then, right before the slap, the video cut. It cut to me on the floor, looking disheveled and manic, screaming at my family. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "We have a team of digital forensics experts who are ready to testify that you were intoxicated and violent," Vanessa said. "We have statements from every guest at that table saying you attacked me verbally and physically. If you file a lawsuit, Tegan, we will release this. We will paint you as the unstable, jealous daughter who tried to destroy her family because she was cut out of the will for being incompetent." My stomach churned. They were going to gaslight the entire world. "You will never work in this town again," Richard added, his voice devoid of emotion. "You will be a pariah, or you can take $1 million and live a life of luxury. It is a simple choice." I looked at the check, $1 million. I looked at Logan. He was watching me with a smirk, thinking he had won, thinking that everyone had a price. I felt the recorder taping against my ribs. I needed more. I needed a confession. I needed them to admit the crime, not just the cover-up. I walked over to the window, turning my back to them. I needed to look conflicted. "It is not just about the money," I said quietly. "It is about Grandma Eleanor. I found the will. Richard, the handwritten one." I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me. "That is a forgery," Richard said quickly. "A desperate attempt by a confused old woman. It has no legal standing." "It was witnessed by Samuel Hart," I said, turning around to face them. The name hung in the air like a curse. Logan flinched. Richard went still. "Samuel Hart is a senile old man who lost his license for malpractice." Vanessa spat. "No one will believe him." I took a step forward. "I think they will." I said, "I have been looking for him. I think he wants to talk. I think he feels guilty about what you made him do 7 years ago." I saw the cracks beginning to form. Logan was sweating. He was wiping his hands on his trousers. "You haven't found him," Logan said, his voice cracking slightly. "You are bluffing. He is gone." "Is he?" I asked. "Or is he just waiting for the right moment? If I bring him to court, Richard, if he testifies that you blackmailed him into filing the fake will, $1 million won't be enough to keep you out of prison." That did it. Logan snapped. The pressure of the last few weeks, the fear of losing his unearned kingdom, it all boiled over. He slammed his hand against the glass window. "Stop it," Logan shouted. "Stop acting like you have any power. You have nothing. You are nothing." "Logan, be quiet," Richard warned, his voice low. "No," Logan yelled, turning on his father. "Why are we listening to her? Why are we offering her money? We should have just crushed her like we did the others." He turned his wild eyes on me. "You think you can find Hart? Good luck. He is a coward. He ran away because he knows what happens when you cross us." "Logan," Vanessa said sharply, "sit down." But Logan was too far gone. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to prove he was the big man. "You are so smart. Tegan," Logan sneered. "You think you saved the company? You think you are the hero? You are just a loose end, and we know how to handle loose ends." He took a step toward me, his face red with rage. "We should have handled Hart permanently," Logan shouted, his voice echoing off the empty walls. "If Dad hadn't been so soft, if we had just finished him off instead of letting him run to Wisconsin, none of this would be happening. We wouldn't have to deal with you digging up the past." The silence that followed was absolute. Time seemed to freeze. Richard closed his eyes. Vanessa went pale. Logan stood there, chest heaving, the words hanging in the air. If we had just finished him off? It was not a direct confession of murder, but it was a confession of intent. It was a confession of a conspiracy to silence a witness. It was an admission that they knew exactly where Hart was and had discussed harming him. And the recorder was running. I looked at Logan. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, letting the weight of his stupidity crush the room. Then I looked at Richard. I saw the defeat in his eyes. He knew. He knew his son had just handed me the keys to the kingdom. I looked down at the settlement agreement on the table. I reached out and picked it up. $1 million, I said softly. I ripped the paper in half. Then I ripped it again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the expensive hardwood floor. "I do not want your money. Richard," I said, "I do not want your hush money. I do not want your charity." I looked at Vanessa. "And you can release that video. Go ahead. Show the world what you did to me. Because when I am done with you, that video will not be a smear campaign. It will be Exhibit B in your criminal trial." I turned to the door. "Tegan, wait," Richard called out. There was desperation in his voice now. The command was gone. I did not stop. I walked out of the living room, down the hallway, and out the front door. I walked down the path, my legs feeling like they were made of jelly. I wanted to run. I expected to hear footsteps behind me. I expected Logan to come charging out with a fireplace poker. But the house remained silent. They were paralyzed. They were in shock. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before I could get them into the ignition. I started the engine and peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching on the asphalt. I drove fast. I did not look in the rearview mirror until I was 5 miles away, merged onto the highway, surrounded by the safety of other headlights. Only then did I reach under my shirt and rip the tape off my skin. I pulled the recorder out. The little red light was steady. Recording saved. I pulled over into the parking lot of a gas station. I plugged the device into my phone with trembling fingers. I opened the encrypted messaging app Alicia had installed. I attached the file. Subject: the Lake Verity tape. I hit send. A moment later, 3 dots appeared. Then, a message from Alicia. I heard it all. I am already drafting the affidavit. Get to a safe house. Do not go back to your apartment. The war just started. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 7 years. Logan had slipped. He had given me the connection I needed. He had tied the family directly to the threat against Samuel Hart. I looked out at the night. It was dark. But for the first time in a long time, I could see the road ahead clearly. They had tried to buy my silence for $1 million. They had just cost themselves everything. The drive to Wisconsin took 4 hours, but it felt like 4 lifetimes. The landscape shifted from the gray concrete of Minneapolis to the endless, snow-dusted pines of the north. We were chasing a ghost. Alicia's private investigator, a man who charged $300 an hour and was worth every penny, had found a trail that the FBI had missed. Samuel Hart had not just disappeared. He had erased himself. He had sold his house to a shell company, liquidated his assets into cryptocurrency long before it was trendy, and vanished. But everyone leaves a footprint. For Samuel, it was a prescription for blood pressure medication filled at a small pharmacy in Hayward under the name Arthur Vance. We pulled up to the address the investigator had provided, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line. It was not a house. It was a cabin, small and weathered, sitting on the edge of a frozen lake that looked like a sheet of hammered iron. There was smoke curling from the chimney. "Stay in the car," Alicia said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "I do not want to spook him." "No," I said. I opened my door. "He needs to see me. He needs to know I survived." We walked up the gravel path, the snow crunching loudly under our boots. The cabin looked fortified. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, and I spotted a security camera mounted above the door. High-end, out of place for a rustic retreat. Alicia knocked. 3 sharp raps. Silence. We waited. The wind howled through the trees. A lonely, mournful sound. "Mr. Hart?" Alicia called out. "My name is Alicia Romero. I am a federal prosecutor. I am here with Tegan Cooper." We heard movement inside. A heavy lock tumbled, then another. The door opened a crack, kept in place by a heavy security chain. A sliver of a face appeared. It was him. He looked older than he had in the video. His hair was thinning, white wisps clinging to a spotted scalp. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with red, the eyes of a man who had not slept well in 7 years. He looked at Alicia. Then his gaze shifted to me. I saw recognition flash in his eyes, followed immediately by terror. "Go away," he rasped. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "I do not know you. My name is Vance." He tried to slam the door. "Mr. Hart, please," Alicia shouted, jamming her foot in the jamb. "Get out of here," he yelled, panic rising in his voice. "You have no idea what you are doing. If they know you are here—" "Samuel!" I screamed. He froze. He stopped pushing against the door. He looked at me through the crack. I took a step closer, until I was close enough to see the broken capillaries in his nose. "That night," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the wind, "that night at the dinner, when Vanessa poured the wine, when she hit me, when I fell on the floor." I held his gaze. Everyone laughed. Samuel, my father laughed, my brother laughed, the guests laughed. They all thought it was funny to watch a girl be destroyed. I took a breath. But you did not laugh. I whispered. You were the only one at that table who did not smile. Samuel stared at me. His hand on the door loosened its grip. The fear in his eyes was slowly replaced by a profound, crushing sadness. You saw me, he murmured. I saw you look at the camera. I said, I saw you warn me. Samuel closed his eyes. He let out a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to deflate his entire frame. He undid the chain. Come in, he said softly, before you freeze to death. The inside of the cabin was sparse, a single armchair, a small television, and walls lined with bookshelves. It smelled of wood smoke and old paper. It was a monk's cell, a prison of his own making. He gestured for us to sit on the worn sofa. He went to the kitchen and poured 3 glasses of water. His hands were shaking so badly some of the water sloshed onto the floor. How did you find me? He asked, sitting in the armchair. You filled a prescription, Alicia said. You got sloppy. Samuel let out a dry chuckle. High blood pressure, the silent killer, though in my case, I assumed the killer would be much louder. He looked at me. You look like her, he said. Eleanor. You have her chin. Why did you do it? I asked. I did not want small talk. I wanted answers. Why did you file the fake will? Why did you help them steal everything from me? Samuel looked down at his hands. Because Richard Cooper is not just a businessman. Tegan, he is a predator. He leaned forward, his face twisting with the memory. 7 years ago, your grandmother came to me. She knew she was dying. She knew Richard was going to run the company into the ground. She wanted to save it, and she wanted to save you. We drafted the handwritten will in secret. It was legal. It was binding. So what happened? Alicia asked. 2 days after Eleanor died, Richard invited me to his office. Samuel said, he did not ask about the will. He put a file on his desk. It was a police file. Samuel paused, swallowing hard. My son, David, he was 19 at the time, a stupid kid. He had gotten mixed up with some bad people in Chicago, drugs, distribution. He was looking at 20 years in federal prison. I stared at him. Richard had connections. Samuel continued. He had paid people off. He had the evidence buried. He told me that if I filed Eleanor's real will, the evidence against David would miraculously reappear on a DA's desk the next morning. My son would be destroyed. Or I could file the document Richard had prepared, the forgery, and David would go free. Samuel looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. I am a lawyer, Tegan. I swore an oath, but I'm also a father. I could not let my boy go to prison, so I sold my soul. I filed the fake will. I watched them strip you of your inheritance, and I have lived in hell every day since. The room was silent. I felt a surge of anger, but it was tempered by a strange, hollow pity. Richard had used a father's love as a weapon. It was exactly the kind of monster he was. But why send me the copy now? I asked. Why the envelope? Samuel rubbed his face. Because David died last month. He whispered, car accident. He is gone. Richard has no leverage over me anymore. I have nothing left to lose. And when I heard about the financial trouble, about how they were treating you, I realized I could not die with this secret. Alicia leaned forward. Mr. Hart, we need more than a story. We need proof. The copy you sent Tegan is inadmissible without the original. Samuel nodded. I know. He stood up. He walked over to a heavy oak bookshelf in the corner. He reached behind a row of encyclopedias and pulled out a small safe. He punched in a code. The door clicked open. He reached inside and pulled out a black external hard drive. He held it out to Alicia. His hand was steady now. I did not just file the fake will, Samuel said. I kept the original. I knew that one day Richard would double-cross me. I needed insurance. The original handwritten will, with the wet ink signature, is in a safety deposit box in Duluth. This drive contains the location and the key code. He looked at me. But there is something else on there. The dinner, I said. Samuel nodded. Richard thinks he is smart, Samuel said. He installed that security system to spy on his staff, but he forgot that as his legal counsel, I had administrative access to the server. That night, the night of the party, I knew something was going to happen. The tension in the house was toxic. Vanessa was drinking. Logan was agitated. I set the server to mirror the recording to a private cloud account. He tapped the hard drive. I have the full recording. Tegan, high definition, audio and video. Alicia took the drive. She looked at it like it was the Holy Grail. Does it have audio of what happened after I left? I asked. Samuel's face darkened. Yes, he said, and that is the part that will send them to prison. Can we hear it? I asked. Samuel nodded. He took a laptop from the side table, plugged in the drive, and opened a file. The screen flickered to life. It was the dining room. I saw myself running out of the frame, wine dripping from my dress. The camera stayed on the table. I watched as Vanessa sat back down, picking up a napkin to wipe her hand. She did not look remorseful. She looked annoyed. She is such a drama queen, Vanessa said on the recording. Her voice was crystal clear. Richard took a sip of his wine. We need to make sure she stays quiet, Richard said calmly. If she starts digging into the accounts, she might find the transfer structure. She won't. Logan laughed. He was eating a piece of duck. She is too stupid. She actually thinks she saved us. I watched the screen, mesmerized by their callousness. We need to accelerate the asset strip, Richard said. Move the funds to the Cayman accounts by Friday. Once the bankruptcy is declared, the creditors will get nothing, and we will be insulated. Alicia gasped. Bankruptcy fraud, she whispered. They were planning to tank the company on purpose to defraud the creditors, after stealing your money to keep it afloat just long enough to loot it. The recording continued. What about Hart? Logan asked, pointing at Samuel on the screen. In the video, the Samuel on screen sat perfectly still. Mr. Hart understands his position, Richard said, looking at Samuel with a cold smile. He knows that his son's freedom depends on his discretion regarding the will. Isn't that right, Sam? In the video, Samuel nodded slowly. Yes, Richard. Samuel stopped the playback. He looked at me. They admitted to the fraud. They admitted to the blackmail. They admitted to the embezzlement. It is all there. Tegan, every word. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. It was more than I had hoped for. It was total annihilation. This ends them, Alicia said, her voice hard with professional satisfaction. With this drive and your testimony, we have a RICO case. We have extortion. We have wire fraud. Samuel looked at me. I am sorry. Tegan, he said softly. I am so sorry I was too much of a coward to help you that night. I saw you look at me. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to stop her, but I was afraid. I looked at the old man. I saw the guilt that had eaten him alive for 7 years. You are helping me now, I said. That is what matters. I stood up and walked over to the window. I looked out at the frozen lake. I thought about Richard. I thought about Vanessa. I thought about the settlement agreement I had torn up. They were probably celebrating right now. They probably thought that by scaring me off, they had won. They probably thought I was running away. They had no idea that I had just found the nuclear launch codes. I turned back to Samuel and Alicia. We need to go back to Minneapolis, I said. Alicia nodded, packing the hard drive into her briefcase. We are going straight to the U.S. attorney, she said. We are going to get a warrant. Samuel stood up. He grabbed a heavy coat from the hook. I am coming with you, he said. Are you sure? Alicia asked. Once you step back into that city, you are a target. Samuel buttoned his coat. He looked at the empty cabin, then at the photo of a young boy on the mantel. I am done hiding, he said. Let them come. I have been waiting 7 years to wipe the smiles off their faces. We walked out into the cold night air. The wind was biting, but I did not feel it. I felt a fire burning in my chest. I looked at the moon hanging over the trees. Get ready, Richard, I whispered to the darkness. The girl you laughed at is coming home, and she is bringing the Reaper with her. The raid was authorized for 6 o'clock in the morning. The sky over Lake Minnetonka was a bruised purple, the sun struggling to rise behind a wall of gray clouds. I sat in the back of an unmarked black SUV, watching the breath fog up the window. My hands were clasped in my lap, not in prayer, but in anticipation. Beside me, Alicia Romero was checking her watch, her face illuminated by the pale light of a laptop screen. "It is time," she said. Ahead of us, the convoy moved. 4 vehicles, silent and lethal, rolled down the long, winding driveway of the Cooper estate. I had driven this road 1,000 times. I had driven it in tears. I had driven it in fear. I had driven it with a heart full of desperate hope that my father would finally love me. Today, I was driving it as the executioner. The iron gates, usually an impenetrable barrier to the outside world, were already open. The FBI had cut the electronic lock. We swept into the courtyard, the gravel crunching under the heavy tires. The agents spilled out of the cars with practiced efficiency. They wore windbreakers with those 3 yellow letters emblazoned on the back, letters that turned the blood of white-collar criminals to ice. FBI. I stepped out of the car. The air was frigid, biting at my exposed skin, but I did not button my coat. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to feel every second of this reality. "Go, go, go," an agent shouted. They hit the front door with a battering ram. 1 strike, that was all it took. The heavy oak door, which Richard had imported from a French chateau to impress his investors, splintered inward with a deafening crack. We followed them in. The foyer was exactly as I remembered it. The marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the oppressive silence of a house that was more museum than home. But now, that silence was shattered by the sound of heavy boots and shouting voices. "Federal agents! Search warrant! Stay where you are!" I walked into the main hallway. To my right, the double doors to the breakfast room were open. Vanessa was there. She was wearing a silk dressing gown that probably cost more than my car. She was standing by the window, a delicate porcelain teacup in her hand, frozen in the middle of a sip. She saw the agents swarming the hall. Then she saw me. Her eyes went wide. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a physical wipe. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The teacup slipped from her fingers. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the cup fall, turning over in the air, spilling Earl Grey tea in a brown arc. It hit the marble floor and exploded. Crash. The sound was sharp and final. The shards skittered across the floor, coming to rest at the boots of a tactical officer. Vanessa Cooper, the woman who had slapped me, the woman who had laughed at me, looked down at the broken china and then back up at me. She began to tremble. It was a violent, uncontrollable shaking. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, her knuckles white. "Please," she whispered. "Richard." Richard appeared at the top of the stairs. He was still in his pajamas, his hair messy, his face a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, gripping the banister. "Do you know who I am? Get out of my house." An agent met him halfway up the stairs. "Richard Cooper, I have a warrant for the search of these premises and the seizure of all electronic devices and financial records. Step aside, sir." Richard looked at the agent. Then he looked past him, down into the foyer. He looked at me. I stood there, flanked by Alicia and 2 federal agents. I did not look away. I did not flinch. I let him see me. I let him see the daughter he had thrown away. "Hello, Father," I said. My voice was calm, steady, echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. Richard's face went purple. "You," he hissed. "You did this. You ungrateful, treacherous little—" "Save it for the jury, Richard," Alicia said, stepping forward. Agents moved past him, heading for the bedrooms and the home office. I watched as Logan was dragged out of his room down the hall, looking like a frightened child, shouting about his rights. I turned away from them. I was not here to watch them squirm. Not yet. I had a specific mission. "I need to get to the study. I told the lead agent, the one on the first floor. "Follow me," he said. We walked down the East Wing corridor. This was the quiet part of the house, the part where my grandmother, Eleanor, had spent her final years. Richard rarely came down here. He said it smelled like old people. We reached the heavy double doors of the library. I pushed them open. The room was dark, the curtains drawn against the morning light. It smelled of leather, dust, and vanilla pipe tobacco, my grandfather's scent, which had lingered in the upholstery for decades. This was Eleanor's sanctuary. The agents began to fan out, pulling books off shelves and opening drawers. "Stop," I said. They looked at me. "You are looking in the wrong place," I said. I walked across the room to the fireplace. Above the mantel hung a large oil painting. It was a landscape of the north shore of Lake Superior, painted in moody blues and grays. It had hung there for as long as I could remember. When I was 10 years old, I had caught Grandma Eleanor standing in front of this painting, moving her hand along the frame. She had smiled at me and put a finger to her lips. "Our secret, Tegan," she had said. I reached up and gripped the heavy gold frame. My fingers found the hidden latch on the right side. I pulled. The painting swung outward on silent hinges. Behind it, embedded in the stone of the chimney breast, was a steel wall safe. One of the agents whistled. "Nice hiding spot. Do we need a drill?" "No," I said. "I know the combination." I stared at the keypad. It was an old electronic model. The numbers faded from use. Richard had spent years trying to find Eleanor's hidden assets. He had torn the house apart looking for her jewelry, her bonds, but he had never found this safe because he never understood Eleanor. He thought she was complicated. He thought she was vindictive. He did not know that she was simply a woman who loved her family, the real family. I reached out. My hand was shaking slightly. I typed in 6 digits. 0, 4, 2, 2, 9, 8. April 22nd, 1998. My birthday. The light on the keypad blinked green. There was a mechanical whir, and the heavy bolt retracted with a solid thunk. I pulled the handle. The heavy steel door swung open. The safe was not empty. Sitting on the metal shelf were 2 items. The first was a leather-bound book, its cover worn and scratched. I reached in and took it out. I opened it carefully. It was Eleanor's diary. I flipped through the pages. The handwriting was sharp, angry. October 10th. Richard was here again today. He was shouting about the Verity Project. He demanded I sign the power of attorney. I refused. He looked at me with such hatred. I fear for the company. I fear for Tegan. I turned the page. November 12th. Samuel came to see me. He is a good man, but he is afraid. Richard has found something on him. Leverage. I can see it in Samuel's eyes. He's going to break. I must protect Tegan. I must write the true will before it is too late. Tears pricked my eyes. She had known. She had known she was surrounded by wolves, and she had spent her final dying breaths trying to build a fortress for me. "Ms. Cooper?" the agent asked gently. "What is the second item?" I looked back into the safe. Sitting next to where the diary had been was a small, silver USB drive. It looked modern, out of place in the dusty safe. I picked it up. It was cold in my hand. "This cannot be from Eleanor," Alicia said, peering over my shoulder. "That technology is too new." I turned the drive over. On the back, a small piece of masking tape had a date written on it in black marker. November 14th, the date of the dinner, the date of the slap. I realized then what had happened. Samuel. He must have hidden it here. He was the only other person who knew the code. He was Eleanor's lawyer. He knew about the safe. On the night of the dinner, when he saw the violence unfolding, when he saw the trap Richard was setting for me, he must have slipped away. He must have downloaded the footage and hidden it in the one place he knew Richard would never look, the heart of Eleanor's legacy. I looked at the agent. "Do you have a laptop?" He nodded and opened his field computer on the desk. I plugged the USB drive in. A folder popped up. It contained a single video file labeled Dinner Full Evidence. I clicked play. The video opened. It was a high-angle shot of the dining room. I saw myself falling. I saw the wine. I saw the laughter. But then, the camera zoomed in. It was a digital zoom, grainy but clear enough. It focused on Samuel Hart. He was sitting at the table, amidst the laughing faces of my family. He was looking down at his plate, his face a mask of misery. Then, he looked up. He looked directly into the lens of the camera. He stared at it for 5 full seconds. Then, he raised his hand slightly, shielding it from the others, and pointed a finger at the molding where the camera was hidden. He tapped his finger against his temple. Remember. Then, on the screen, he mouthed 2 words. For Tegan? I froze. He had not just recorded it, he had left a message. He had planted this evidence knowing that one day I would come back to this room. He knew I would open this safe. He had counted on me. I looked away from the screen, my vision blurring with tears. Eleanor had built the safe. She had set the code as my birthday because she knew I was the only one who mattered to her, and Samuel had used that love to hide the weapon that would save me. They had not left me alone. All these years, I thought I was fighting by myself. I thought I was an orphan in a house of monsters. But I wasn't. Eleanor had left me the key. Samuel had left me the sword. I closed the laptop. I picked up the diary. Take it all, I said to the agent. Bag it, tag it. This is the end of them. We walked out of the library. The house was in chaos. Agents were carrying boxes of files out the front door. I saw Logan sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, his head in his hands, weeping. I walked past him. I did not stop. I walked to the front door, where Richard was being detained. He was sitting on a chair, a federal agent standing over him. He looked up as I approached. He saw the diary in my hand. He went pale. He recognized it. You, he stammered. You opened the safe. I walked up to him. I stood tall, the morning light streaming in through the shattered door behind me. I did. Father, I said. How? He whispered. How did you know? I leaned in close, so only he could hear me. Because Grandma Eleanor loved me, I said, and she knew that one day you would try to bury me, so she gave me a shovel. I turned and walked out of the house, out into the cold, clean air of the morning. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting a brilliant golden light over the snow. Behind me, the empire of the Cooper family was being dismantled, piece by piece, but I did not look back. I had a diary to read. I had a trial to prepare for. And for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of the future. The trial of the century, as the local Minneapolis papers had dubbed it, was not fought with guns or knives. It was fought with narratives. And as day 3 of the proceedings began, it became terrifyingly clear that the Cooper family had brought a very expensive, very meticulously crafted narrative to court. Their strategy was simple: assassination, not of my body, but of my character. The defense attorney, Marcus Corbin, was a man who moved around the courtroom like a shark in a tank. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his voice a smooth baritone that projected authority and reasonable doubt. He did not attack the facts of the financial transfer directly. Instead, he attacked the source. He painted a picture of me that was unrecognizable, yet disturbingly plausible to an outsider. In his opening statement, he had described me not as a victim of fraud, but as a troubled young woman, emotionally unstable, and consumed by a pathological jealousy of her stepmother and brother. Now, it was their turn to present their case. The courtroom was packed. The air conditioner hummed. Struggling to battle the body heat of 200 spectators, I sat at the plaintiff's table, my back straight, my hands folded. Alicia Romero sat beside me, her presence a silent wall of granite. "Don't react," she had whispered to me that morning. "No matter what they say, if you roll your eyes, if you sigh, if you look angry, they win. You are a statue. Tegan, you are made of stone." I held on to that image as Vanessa Cooper took the stand. She was dressed in a soft, pastel blue cardigan and a modest skirt. She wore no jewelry. Her makeup was minimal, designed to make her look pale and fragile. She looked like a mother, not a socialite. Corbin approached the witness box gently, as if approaching a frightened deer. "Mrs. Cooper," he began softly, "can you tell the jury about the night of November 14th? Vanessa took a shaky breath. She reached for a tissue and dabbed at her dry eyes. "It was supposed to be a celebration," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound brave. "We were so proud of Logan. The company had been through such a hard time. We just wanted a nice family dinner." "And how did Tegan behave that evening?" Corbin asked. Vanessa looked down at her hands. She was agitated. From the moment she arrived, she had been drinking. I could smell it on her. She started shouting about money. She was screaming that we stole from her. It was incoherent. "Did you feel threatened?" "Yes," Vanessa whispered. "She lunged at me. She was hysterical. I was so scared she was going to hurt someone. I just reacted. I tried to push her away, to snap her out of it. It was a reflex. I never meant to hurt her. I love Tegan. I have tried so hard to be a mother to her." I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She loved me? This was the woman who had told me I was a stain on the family. Then came the visual evidence. "Your Honor," Corbin said, turning to the jury, "the defense enters Exhibit D, security footage from the night in question." My heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment of truth. But as the video played on the large screens, I realized with a sinking horror that truth was a malleable thing. The video was short, it was choppy, it started midstream. On the screen, I was standing up, my face contorted in anger, my mouth open in a shout. The audio was muffled, but my aggressive posture was clear. The video then cut to Vanessa looking shocked, stepping back. Then, it cut to me stumbling forward, a stumble caused by my heel catching on the rug. But on screen, it looked like I was charging at her. Then, the slap. But in this context, without the preceding minutes of verbal abuse from her, without the wine pour, the slap looked defensive. It looked like a desperate woman protecting herself from a drunk assailant. The video ended before the laughter started. The courtroom was silent. I could feel the eyes of the jury on me. I saw a woman in the second row of the jury box frown and shake her head. They were buying it. They were seeing a violent, out-of-control girl attacking her stepmother. "The defense rests with this witness," Corbin said. Alicia leaned over to me. They cut the pour. She scribbled on her notepad. And the laughter. I nodded. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. Next came Logan. If Vanessa was the victim, Logan was the hero. He sat in the witness box, looking earnest and young. He spoke about the burden of leadership. He spoke about the sleepless nights he spent worrying about the company. Tegan never really understood the complexities of the development business, Logan said, sounding regretful. She was in administration. She filed papers. When the crisis hit, she wanted to help, but her ideas were simplistic. "And the $600,000? Corbin asked. Logan sighed. It was a family contribution. She offered it. We tried to refuse, but she insisted. She wanted to feel involved. We treated it as an investment in her future, a way to keep the family legacy alive. We never imagined she would turn around and sue us for it. It breaks my heart, honestly, to see her like this." He looked at me with sad, puppy-dog eyes. I stared back at him. I remembered him laughing at me while I lay on the floor covered in wine. I remembered him threatening me at the model home. The disconnect between the monster I knew and the saint on the stand was psychopathic. Then it was my turn. The cross-examination was not an interview. It was an ambush. Corbin did not start with the money. He started with my mind. "Ms. Cooper," he said, standing uncomfortably close to the plaintiff's table. "Is it true that you have a history of anxiety?" "I have seen a therapist for stress. Yes," I said, my voice steady. Working at the Cooper Group was a high-pressure environment. "And you felt overlooked at the company? You felt your father favored your brother?" "My father appointed my brother to a vice president position, while I was kept in an entry-level role. despite my superior academic qualifications. I stated flatly, "That is a fact, not a feeling." Corbin smiled, a shark baring its teeth. "Superior qualifications? You seem to have a very high opinion of yourself. Ms. Cooper, tell me, on the night of the dinner, how many glasses of wine did you have?" "None," I said. "None?" Corbin raised an eyebrow. Looking at the jury, "Your stepmother testified she smelled alcohol. Your brother testified you were slurring your words. Are they both lying?" "Yes," I said, "they are lying." "So everyone is lying except you?" Corbin asked, his voice rising in incredulity. "Your father, your mother, your brother, the guests, they are all part of a grand conspiracy to humiliate you? Does that sound rational to you, Ms. Cooper? Or does that sound like paranoia?" "It sounds like a cover-up," I said. Corbin scoffed. He picked up a document from his table. "Let's talk about this so-called loan. You claim you saved the company. You claim you analyzed the cash flow when no one else could. But isn't it true, Ms. Cooper, that you were fired for incompetence?" "I was fired the morning after I confronted them about the money." I corrected him. "You were fired for creating a hostile work environment," Corbin shouted, slamming the paper down. "You were fired because you are impossible to work with. You were fired because you are a liability." He was trying to break me. He was pushing every button, poking every bruise, trying to make the crazy Tegan come out. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to prove his point. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to stand up and scream that he was a liar. I wanted to throw the water pitcher at him. Stone, I thought. Be stone. I took a deep breath. I looked Corbin in the eye. "Mr. Corbin," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, analytical register. "The liquidity crisis at Cooper Group was caused by a 40% overrun in material costs for the Lake Verity project. The debt covenants required a current ratio of 1.5. On November 10th, the ratio was 0.8. The company was insolvent." I saw Corbin blink. He wasn't expecting math. "My transfer of $600,000 on November 11th restored the ratio to 1.2, allowing the bridge loan from First National to clear on November 13th. I continued, reciting the numbers I had memorized, the numbers that were etched into my soul. That is not an opinion. That is not paranoia. That is math, and math does not lie, even if my family does. A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. The jury shifted. The woman in the second row looked up, interested. Corbin tried to interrupt. "Ms. Cooper, I am not asking for a lecture. I am answering your question about my competence," I said, cutting him off. "An incompetent employee does not liquidity test a multi-million-dollar corporation over a weekend. An incompetent employee does not personally fund the payroll for 300 construction workers." I turned to the jury. "I did not give them that money because I wanted a hug. I said, I gave them that money because without it, the company my grandmother built would have ceased to exist on November 15th. Corbin stared at me. He had lost the rhythm. He had tried to make it emotional, and I had made it transactional. He gathered his papers, looking flustered. "No further questions," he muttered. I stepped down from the stand. My legs were shaking, but I walked tall. I sat down next to Alicia. "You did good," she whispered. "You held the line." But as I looked at the jury, I felt a knot of dread. They were divided. I could see it in their faces. Some looked convinced by my logic, but others were still thinking about that video. They were thinking about Vanessa's tears. In a he said, she said battle, the side with the better acting usually won. We needed a knockout. We needed the truth. Judge Sterling looked at Alicia. "Ms. Romero, does the plaintiff have any further witnesses?" Alicia stood up. She smoothed her jacket. She did not look at the judge. She looked at the back of the courtroom. The double doors at the back opened. A man walked in. He was flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. He wore a simple gray suit, and he looked tired, but his head was held high. The murmur in the courtroom grew to a buzz. People were craning their necks. At the defense table, I saw Richard stiffen. I saw Vanessa grab Logan's arm. They had thought he was gone. They had thought he was a ghost story. "Your Honor," Alicia said, her voice ringing out clear and strong, "the plaintiff wishes to call a rebuttal witness. We call Samuel Hart to the stand." Corbin shot up from his seat. "Objection! Mr. Hart was not on the original witness list. This is trial by ambush. He is a rebuttal witness to impeach the credibility of the defendants." "Your Honor," Alicia shot back, "and he brings with him new physical evidence that directly contradicts the testimony of Vanessa and Logan Cooper." Judge Sterling looked at Samuel Hart, who was now standing at the gate of the bar, waiting. The judge looked at Richard Cooper, whose face had turned the color of ash. "Objection overruled," Judge Sterling said. "The witness will take the stand." I watched Samuel walk past the defense table. He did not look at Richard. He did not look at the floor. He walked with the heavy, deliberate steps of a man carrying a burden he was about to set down. He took the stand. He swore the oath. I looked at him. Our eyes met across the crowded room. It was the same look he had given me 7 years ago, the same intensity, but this time there was no fear. There was only resolve. He gave me a single, barely perceptible nod. "It is time," the nod said. "Let's burn it down." Alicia walked to the podium. She was holding the black hard drive in her hand. "Mr. Hart," she said, "can you tell the court what your relationship is to the Cooper family?" Samuel leaned into the microphone. His voice was gravelly, worn by years of silence, but it filled the room. "I was the personal attorney for Eleanor Cooper," he said, "and for 7 years, I have been the keeper of their secrets." The courtroom went deadly silent. Even the air conditioner seemed to hold its breath. "And today," Samuel said, looking directly at Richard, "I am done keeping them." Samuel Hart sat in the witness box, a man unburdened. The heavy coat of fear he had worn for 7 years had been shed, revealing a core of steely resolve. He looked out at the courtroom, his eyes sweeping over the stunned faces of the jury, the frantic whispering of the defense team, and finally, resting on Richard Cooper. "Mr. Hart," Alicia asked, her voice echoing in the silent room, "you stated that you are the keeper of secrets. What secrets are you referring to?" "The secret of how the Cooper empire was stolen," Samuel said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room, and the secret of how a grandmother tried to save her granddaughter from the wolves she raised. "Objection!" Corbin shouted, jumping to his feet. "This is hearsay. This is inflammatory." "Overruled," Judge Sterling said, his eyes fixed on Samuel. "The witness will continue." Alicia walked to the AV cart. She plugged in the black hard drive we had retrieved from the safe. "Your Honor, the plaintiff submits Exhibit E," she said. "This is the unedited, continuous security footage from the dining room of the Cooper estate on November 14th, 7 years ago." The screens flickered, the familiar scene appeared again, but this time, there were no jump cuts. This time, the timeline was unbroken. The courtroom watched as the younger version of me sat at the table. They heard the audio, crisp and clear. They heard Richard taking credit for my work. They heard me stand up, my voice shaking not with drunkenness, but with the desperate courage of a girl fighting for her life. They heard the numbers, $600,000. They heard Vanessa's voice, sharp and cruel. "You are a receptionist with delusions of grandeur." And then, the moment that had been twisted by the defense was played in its raw, ugly truth. Vanessa reaching for the wine, the deliberate, malicious pour, the shock on my face, and then the slap. It was not a defensive push. It was a vicious, backhanded strike meant to humiliate. And then came the sound that changed everything. Laughter. It started on the screen, a high, braying sound from Logan, then Richard, then Vanessa, then the guests. It filled the courtroom, a symphony of bullying that made the jurors recoil. They watched as I lay on the floor, covered in wine, while the people who were supposed to love me pointed and jeered. I looked at the jury. The woman in the second row had her hand over her mouth. A man in the back row was glaring at Richard with open disgust. But the video did not end there. On the screen, I ran out of the room. The camera lingered on the table. Alicia let it play. The courtroom listened as the laughter died down, replaced by the clinking of silverware and the calm, chilling conversation of conspirators. "She is gone," Vanessa said on the screen. "God, she is pathetic." "Focus," Richard said. His voice was cold, calculating. "We need to move the assets. If she actually tries to claim that money, we need to make sure the accounts are empty. Transfer the holdings to the shell company in the Caymans. We will declare bankruptcy on the domestic entity on Monday." Gasps rippled through the gallery. This was not just family drama. This was bankruptcy fraud. This was a federal crime caught on tape. "And what about the will?" Logan asked on the screen. "What if she finds out about the handwritten one?" "She won't," Richard said, "because Samuel knows what is at stake." The camera zoomed in on Samuel. "Don't you— Sam?" Richard asked. "We wouldn't want the police to receive that file on David. Would we?" On the screen, Samuel nodded, a look of utter defeat on his face. "Yes, Richard." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, where all the air had been sucked out by the sheer weight of the truth. Alicia turned to the witness. "Mr. Hart," she asked softly, "is that your voice on the recording?" "Yes," Samuel said. "And did you file a fraudulent will under duress to protect your son from Richard Cooper?" "I did." Samuel said, "I filed a forgery created by Richard Cooper. The original will, written by Eleanor Cooper, left 51% of the voting shares to Tegan Cooper." Corbin stood up, but he looked defeated. His shark-like energy was gone. He looked like a man who knew he was captaining a sinking ship. "Your Honor," he stammered, "we object to the authenticity of this digital file. It could be a deepfake." Judge Sterling looked at Corbin over his glasses. The look was withering. "Mr. Corbin, unless you have evidence that a deepfake technology existed 7 years ago that could fool this court, I suggest you sit down before I hold you in contempt." Corbin sat down. Alicia wasn't done. She walked back to the plaintiff's table and picked up the leather-bound book. "Your Honor, we also submit into evidence the personal diary of Eleanor Cooper, recovered this morning from a hidden safe in the Cooper estate, a safe that could only be opened by the birth date of the plaintiff, Tegan Cooper." She opened the book to the marked page. "October 10th. She read, "Richard is pressuring me. He wants the company. He is threatening Samuel. I must hide the truth where only Tegan can find it. She is the only one strong enough to stop him." Alicia closed the book. "The defense rests, Your Honor." Judge Sterling sat back in his chair. He looked at the defense table. Richard Cooper was staring at the table, his face a mask of gray shock. Vanessa was weeping, but this time, the tears were real. They were the tears of a woman realizing her life of luxury was over. Logan was hunched over, his head in his hands, unable to look at anyone. The jury did not need to deliberate. In a civil trial of this nature, with this level of overwhelming evidence, the judge had the power to issue a summary judgment on the specific claims of inheritance validity. Judge Sterling picked up his gavel. He did not bang it. He held it, weighing it, like the sword of justice. "In 30 years on the bench," Judge Sterling said, his voice low and furious, "I have never seen a more appalling abuse of power, trust, and family." He looked at Richard. "You did not just steal a company, Mr. Cooper. You attempted to destroy a human being. You used the legal system as a weapon. You blackmailed a father, and you defrauded this court." Richard did not look up. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Tegan Cooper. Judge Sterling ruled, the will probated 7 years ago is hereby declared void ab initio. The handwritten will of Eleanor Cooper is recognized as the true and valid last testament." He turned to the court clerk. "Furthermore, given the evidence of extortion, wire fraud, bankruptcy fraud, and perjury presented today, I am referring this entire record to the United States Attorney's Office for immediate criminal prosecution. Marshals, please ensure the defendants do not leave the jurisdiction." Bang! The gavel hit the wood. Pandemonium erupted. Reporters jumped over the benches, shouting questions. The marshals moved in, surrounding the defense table, not to protect them, but to secure them. I watched as Richard stood up. He looked old. He looked broken. He looked at me across the chaos. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a hollow confusion, as if he still could not understand how the girl he had underestimated had brought down his entire world. Vanessa was arguing with a marshal, her voice shrill and panicked. Logan was just sitting there, staring at the empty air. I stood up. I felt light. The heavy weight that had been pressing down on my chest for 7 years, the weight of their judgment, their laughter, their cruelty, was gone. Alicia turned to me and smiled. It was the first time I had seen her truly smile. "It is over." "Tegan," she said, "you won." I looked at the chaos one last time. "No," I said, "Grandma Eleanor won." I walked out of the courtroom. The double doors swung open, and the flashbulbs blinded me. The hallway was a sea of microphones and cameras. "Ms. Cooper, how do you feel?" "Tegan, is it true you own the company now? Will your father go to jail?" I ignored them. I walked through the crowd, my head high, just like I had walked into the courthouse. But this time, I wasn't walking into a fight. I was walking into my future. I reached the end of the hallway, where the tall windows looked out over the city of Minneapolis. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the skyline. Somewhere out there was the Cooper Group Tower, my tower. A shadow fell over me. I turned. Samuel Hart was standing there. He had his coat on. He looked tired, but the haunted look was gone from his eyes. He looked like a man who could finally sleep. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," I corrected. Samuel shook his head. "No, you did it. I just gave you the map. You had to walk the path." He looked out the window at the city. "You know," he said, a small, wry smile touching his lips, "that night, at the dinner, when you fell, when they were all howling like hyenas." I nodded. "I remember." "I wanted to help you," Samuel said. "I wanted to rush over and pick you up, but I knew that if I did, Richard would know I was against him. He would have destroyed the evidence before I could hide it." He turned to look at me. So I sat there, and I didn't smile. "I know." I said, "I saw you." I didn't smile. Samuel continued, his voice thick with emotion, "Because I looked at you on that floor, with the wine in your hair and the fire in your eyes, and I knew something they didn't." "What?" I asked. "I knew you would come back," he said. "I knew that you were the only Cooper with a spine. I knew that one day you would walk back into their lives and burn their house of cards to the ground, and I wanted to be there to hand you the matches." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was the only tear I had shed all day. "Thank you, Samuel," I whispered. He patted my shoulder. "Go run your empire. Tegan, make Eleanor proud." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of people leaving the courthouse. I turned back to the window. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't see the scared girl anymore. I didn't see the victim. I saw a CEO. I saw a survivor. I thought about the dinner party. I thought about the sound of their laughter, how it had echoed in my nightmares for years. Richard, Vanessa, Logan, they had laughed because they thought power was permanent. They thought money could buy silence. They thought the truth was something they could edit out of existence. But they were wrong. The day they slapped me, the whole room laughed. I watched the reflection of the marshals leading my father away in handcuffs in the street below. Today, I thought, a small, cold smile finally touching my own lips. Only the people who are afraid of the truth are not smiling. And I was smiling. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Do not forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.